research and consulting company that also hosts the Smart Energy Summit. So thank you so much, Abe, for your time and your support of our upcoming event. I'd like to go ahead and just jump right in. The research and market continues to emphasize the growing demand for clean energy solutions. And so interested in how Bidgely is playing into the net zero emissions goal. And maybe you can just give us a brief background of some of the latest things you all are working on.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. We are thanks for inviting us here. As you know, Bijli is playing a premium role in bringing analytics in the energy industry and use of analytics in everyday decisions. And as we learn, net zero is becoming it's a big agenda for the new government, the whole climate program as well. So we are making a difference in the industry by helping people make and utilities make very important decisions which are data driven. We are extracting information to help quantify people what is the benefit of when they buy an EV, who is buying an EV, when are they charging, how does their charging affect on the peak usage, how does it affect on the climate, the effect of carbon scores, etc. When should people charge their cars? People who have solar, what options do they have in terms of creating the maximum impact, positive impact on the environment? Ultimately, we bring the personalization into the energy industry. The energy industry is something has something missing, which is as a consumer, I get my energy bill, but I have no clue what and how is happening behind that bill. So we are bringing the personalization in the industry by helping people understand the impact of their actions and where is their money going and what they should be doing based on their energy, their rate plan, their appliances, etc.
That's great, and certainly see some of that in our research, that the ability to lower cost on energy bills and understand that data behind these programs is helping drive further adoption of new programs. And also just have an interesting data point out of the field showing that 42% of households are highly likely to choose a provider who offers energy from renewables like solar and electric vehicles over traditional energy sources. So certainly seeing that growing demand. Given the past year with COVID-19 and shifts in the consumer market, can you share some of the specific trends that you all are seeing take shape and maybe focus in on some of the changes that you all are noting?
Absolutely. We can start with the industry trends. Of course, one of the industry trend we see is more and more adoption of smart meters. I think the smart meter adoption, in my opinion or knowledge, has already crossed the 50% mark. So we are beyond the majority level, and you're seeing that adoption. Now, of course, with the smart meters comes a lot of data. So the second trend we are seeing is many utilities are hiring the new chief digital officer, chief data officers who are figuring out what do I do with the data. So new IT department initiatives are being set up by large utilities to say how do we do the digital transformation, because now we have deployed the smart meters and we have the data. So applying artificial intelligence and having big data is something new to utilities, and we see a very big investment by utilities after the hardware is deployed into the software stack on both big data and analytics AI engines. The trends on the consumer side that we see are smart home trends. Of course, there's more and more adoption of the devices like smart thermostats from Ecobee and Google Nest, and smart devices like Alexa. I mean, now Alexa is embedded in many different devices. So smart home adoption, although it's skewed in certain type of appliances like thermostats and speakers, much more than traditional appliances, but that adoption is increasing. And the other trend, of course, we see is EVs, which is everybody understands and knows. The adoption of electric vehicle is just at some point, I think few years back, it was like, if at this point, the question is how fast, right? So with comes EVs, comes the trends like the stress on the grid. So almost every single utility in the country is looking at saying, as the penetration of EV increases, what is my plan to manage my grid? Because you have to manage when people charge their electric vehicle. So on one side there is positive for electrification, more revenue, more kwh, but the second side there is a challenge of managing when to charge the cars, because it can create the stress on the grid because of the demand charges. So those are the trends that we see in the industry for now.
It's amazing how quickly this time can go by, but I want to thank you for your insights. Thank you for your participation at Smart Energy Summit. I certainly look forward to talking with you again, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Pleasure to be here.
We're excited to host our 12th annual Smart Energy Summit, and want to thank Osiaco for their sponsorship support of this year's 12th annual event. I've got Lawrence Schmidt joining us today to share more about his role in the company's initiatives. So thank you so much, Laurent, for being here. And again, we're really appreciate your support of this year's event. So if we can just start for a moment and see if you can give a brief introduction of your role and the role that Osiaco is playing in the energy market today.
Yes, so thank you for having us today. Osiaco is a company which has been working onto the integration of distributed energy resources into the residential and prosumer markets. And I myself in charge in Osiaco of the activities related to utilities as well as our European developments. What we have been seeing in the past few months is a very rapid transformation of energy system to prepare for further climate change mitigation, being able to reduce the carbon footprint of energy system, and that has driven to the massive introduction of renewable at all scale of the energy system, whether it's wind, photovoltaics, but as well as new technologies for decarbonizing the transportation, electrical vehicles. And while we introduce renewable into the energy system, more interest for flexibility to balance and manage the energy system, which really question how to best integrate and optimize the flexibility of distributed energy resources into the prosumer back into to the utility and wholesale market. So we are really on the journey on optimizing the integration of distributed energy resources, looking primarily at residential markets, and into the journey of the prosumer wanting to play his role in the energy transition and become low carbon users in the future.
Well, that's great. And there's certainly a major transformation going on right now as the residential and commercial markets are looking to really reduce their overall carbon footprint. Recently, we've had a major energy crisis here in Texas. It's a beautiful day today, but just recently we had many across the state with power outages as a result of the supply really not being able to meet the demand. And I wonder if you might be able to comment a little bit on your perspective of that situation in Texas.
I think the Texas situation has been an eye-opener to the worldwide energy environments, in the fact that energy systems are becoming severely exposed to weather catastrophes, and basically to the complexity of maintaining the energy system life without blackout during these periods. And let's be honest, I think everyone, every prosumer start to realize that it's becoming almost impossible to rely in the future on an electrical system which is going to be available all the time. I think what these catastrophes, and we really sincerely hope everything is going to be recovered soon, is going to question the energy system is overall managed, and particularly how is the resiliency of this energy system maintained, and the role of the prosumer into this resiliency aspect. So of course, one of the key elements is what should be the role of photovoltaics and vehicle parked in a home during these extreme periods. Why don't we enable vehicle to home into these critical periods, while we know the power electronics storage are available, and we are launching a product, Decibel, which is enabling vehicle to home, vehicle to grid functionality. And I think we think these extreme weather events are basically accelerators of these new integration which we see happening into the smart home environment.
Well, we certainly are seeing with our research that consumers have a willingness and really a desire to get their electricity from providers who not only have traditional sources of energy, but also the renewable energy sources. So our latest data shows that 43% of consumers prefer energy providers that offer both. So I think this is going to continue, as everybody has more awareness. And the situation in Texas, I didn't think about my electricity 2 weeks ago at all, and now it is very much top of mind. I asked my husband to buy a generator. So people will respond to the crisis in different ways. But let's get back on some of the other market drivers and trends that you're seeing. So could you share maybe 3 of the top things that you think are happening in the market that will help push things forward?
So the first trend which we really see happening is this need for decarbonizing the energy system on its normal operation periods, and the very rapid introduction of renewable and electrical vehicle at the edge of the system, as well as heat pumps. And here the amount of flexibility in the same time needs to be increased into the system. And here there is a new dilemma on how to integrate distributed energy resources into the home. While these were demand response, PV, and storage were historically siloed in terms of approach, I think they need to be further integrated into the home and thought from a single interface point of view back into the grid. The second element which we see happening is the large amount of IoT available, or I would say smart devices, which is maybe more the term in the US, available in the home environment. A lot of potential smart usage data, but what we see is a missing orchestration and interface layers across this environment, particularly when it comes to energy management services. So that's the second element. And the last one is what I was just referring before, is this a notion of bottom-up resiliency. And here we are not anymore in an environment where we want to optimize or minimize carbon footprint, but we're in an environment where we need to save life, and where we need to find, I would say, every possible resources available during these extreme scenarios, whether they are local diesel generators, vehicle to grid, or dedicated storage. And I think here that will require a different way of integrating all these devices through power electronics. And this power electronics will need to be, in a way, grid forming. So being able to form the frequency when the grid will not be able and will not be available anymore, and in order to be able to safeguard, I would say, emergency critical loads into these prosumers' house. So these are really 3 trends happening in parallel, and that's going to revolutionize, I think, what prosumer need at the interface of the smart home.
Well, certainly consumers are able to be an active participant here, and collectively really have a large impact. Can you share a little bit more about Decibel and that specific technology? It's maybe a little bit complicated, so maybe break it down for us to easily understand what's unique about the technology.
So the first element of the technology is to be an inverter technology. So that's converting AC to DC and DC to AC. And it's capable of connecting various DC direct current device together without going through the AC. So that makes this conversion much more efficient. So if you convert PV into battery, for instance, you only go through a single conversion rather than going through various stages. So it's much more efficient at the power conversion level, as an example. But it also allows to make use of the battery of an electrical vehicle exactly the same way as a standalone battery, as an example. On the top of this voltage source inverter, so voltage source is the technology being used. We also use an IoT environment and a platform which is capable of orchestrating devices around the inverter. So we think the inverter will real-time interact with the rest of the devices into the home, but as well as interaction with the cloud and with the utilities, and being able to use and connect with real-time price, with the DER forecasts and so on, to be able to enhance the customer journey when it comes to optimizing his energy in his, I would say, PV, EV, and house environment.
Well, it's certainly a market and in transition, and I think technologies like yours are going to play a key role in the future. And so we want to thank you again for your time today and for your support of Parks Associates' 12th Annual Smart Energy Summit. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the event.
To welcome you to Smart Energy Summit. For decades, Parks Associates has studied the impact of technology on the consumer and utility markets. Smart Energy Summit Engaging the Consumer addresses the evolution of these markets, the impact of COVID-19 on energy management programs, and new opportunities to drive engagement in utility-sponsored programs. Last year, Smart Energy Summit was our last in-person event we were able to host in February in Austin, Texas. This year is a little different. Instead of hosting across 3 days, we will host our 12th annual Smart Energy Summit across the year. COVID-19, along with a growing focus on green energy solutions, has added new drivers to adoption of energy management products at home, as well as new interest in solar, electric vehicles, and other solutions that will help households save energy and become more self-sufficient. At Smart Energy Summit, we'll present our latest consumer research showing the impact of COVID-19 on attitudes and usage regarding energy at home, as well as the expansion and monetization of energy management and other energy-focused offerings through consumer engagement, new business models, unique partnerships, and innovative technologies. Virtual panels and networking sessions feature executive-level experts from multiple industries, including utilities, service providers, retailers, software providers, and manufacturers. We look forward to sharing more across the year with you. Join us for these upcoming sessions. February 23rd and 24th, Impact of COVID-19, Consumer Behavior and Energy Management, Home Services, Rethinking Utility Revenue Models, Energy Management Platforms, Accelerating Growth, DERMS, Solar, Storage, and Microgrids. On April 28th, MDUs, Leveraging Proptech for Smart Energy Management. August 4th, Next Stages of the EV Evolution. October 27th, Partnerships and Tech Advancements, and Shifting Customer Behavior, Energy Efficiency and Demand Response. Thank you for joining us at Smart Energy Summit. If you miss a live session, you can go back at any time to watch on demand. Go to Watch Replays and click on the session that you want to view. Have you created your own event agenda and swap card? Visit the Agenda and Watch Replay tabs to add sessions that interest you to your own event. You can go back to My Event to revisit any bookmarked sessions, sponsors, and items. We want to make sure that you're connecting with our industry-leading sponsors. You can interact with them by visiting the Booths and the Sponsor tab. You can also bookmark sponsors or add items to your event to view later. Sponsors have uploaded extra materials for attendees. Make sure to visit sponsors that interest you to chat with one of their team members or save documents for later. We have dedicated meeting slots set up for break times between sessions. Continue the discussion by requesting meetings from others in the SwapCard platform. Schedule a meeting with another attendee or a sponsor by visiting their page. The panelists and speakers will be addressing your questions live during the stream. During the stream, use the question tab to ask your questions early in the presentation. Go to the poll tab to answer polls that will be discussed during the live stream. If you need help navigating SwapCard, please reach out to our team by mentioning @Parks Associates in the chat box or by contacting one of our team members via our company page.
Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another in our series of Smart Energy Summit events. This track is titled MDUs, Leveraging Proptech for Smart Energy Management. I'm Patrice Samuels, and I will be leading this track. I'll be talking a little bit about some key insights in smart home adoption in MDUs. After that, we'll have some visionary insights from Dhruva Rajendra, who is the Chief Product Officer at Latch. Right after that, we'll transition into our executive Q&A, and that will be led by Elizabeth Parks. And she will be featuring Sean Miller, who is the president of Point Central, which is an Alarm.com company. After that, we'll have an interactive panel discussion with a number of players in this space. They're all offering smart solutions in the MDU space, so that should be interesting. And then right after that, we invite you to hop on over to our networking discussions. Those will be over in Zoom, so you'll be provided with some links in order to go over there and interact a little bit more with our panelists as well as other audience members who have enjoyed the track with you today. All right. So before we get started, I also want to thank our sponsors, Bidgely, Grid4C, Austin Energy, Decibel, Flow, American Water Home Services, and Very. Now, I would also like to remind you of a number of other opportunities for you to join in the discussion in the Smart Energy Summit series. We've already had 2 opportunities, and after today, there will be 2 additional opportunities for you to participate on August 4 and October 27. All right, so to kick off this track, I'd like to talk at a high level about what is driving MDU adoption, smart home product adoption in MDU properties, my mistake. We've already seen that there are several drivers, right? So on a high level, you have factors that help the company save on operating expenses by reducing energy consumption and labor. But also there's increasing resident retention, there's attracting new residents, and there's increasing rental revenues. Parks Associates did a survey of MDU property builders in 2020, just to get a sense of how these value propositions stacked up. And what we found was that increasing rental revenues was number 1, but energy efficiency, as you can see, was a close second. Now, interestingly, these both ranked above tenant retention solutions as well as tenant acquisition solutions and even property safety solutions. It also ranked above brand differentiation strategies, which we know can drive higher revenues. Now, it's not surprising that energy efficiency and access control are highly valued, because when we talk to property managers about pain points, that just driving unit occupancy is very important, because the property is responsible for energy cost when the unit is not occupied. And also, there's plenty of time which is used up in just property showings. So any remote access solution that can facilitate those self-guided property tours can significantly increase operating efficiencies for many MDUs. But what is more surprising is how highly those energy efficiency value propositions sort of ranked ahead of things like smart devices that mitigate fire, and also those things that help to manage safety or minimize those safety risks. Now, when we think about implementing smart home technology in multifamily properties, we know that the benefits to residents are different than the benefits to property managers. So in our survey of multifamily property builders, we also asked, which of the following tenant benefits do they typically emphasize? Now, here you can see where comfort and convenience are some of the leading value propositions that were emphasized. And this does make sense from a marketing standpoint, because when we look at the consumer market for smart home devices, which is something we've been tracking for a really long time, and in general, we tend to see where comfort and convenience are some of the leading reasons for acquiring these devices, of course, followed by safety and security. Now, what is different here for multifamily buildings is that they tend to emphasize energy management as a tenant value, even before or over and above safety and security. Now, we've encountered some similar research in the past where consumers who lived in single-family residence were more interested in smart solutions that help to manage security and safety than those who lived in multifamily properties. And we think this makes sense, given that multifamily properties a lot of times are in gated communities and already have some level of security, and others are in high-rise buildings with limited access points. So that kind of helps us to understand why security may be a little bit lower on the list there. So we know that property managers are interested in these solutions, and we know that they perceive strong tenant value as well. But are MDU residents really interested in these solutions? Well, our research here is showing that 41% of MDU residents already have at least one smart home device. And that is more than the percentage of single-family home residents who report using these devices, as well also as the percentage of broadband households you see from the very last column there. Now, this has been consistent for at least the past 3 years. And one reason for this is because of the high rate of adoption among MDU owners in particular. Now, this demographic group, including being younger in age, tends to be similar to the typical buyer of smart home devices in general. So that would kind of help to explain that a little bit. Now, when we look at the devices that MDU residents report using, we see where video doorbells are the leading device adopted and used. And this is actually consistent with single-family homes. We're also seeing where smart energy devices are, those are the ones highlighted in that lighter blue. They're kind of falling a little bit in the middle of the pack there. That is with the exception of light bulbs, of course, which is at the top. Now, this is a little different in single-family homes. In the single-family home, we tend to see where smart thermostats in particular are a little higher in the list than in MDUs. And this could be the result of single-family homes being a little bit larger and requiring more energy, and also because a lot of multifamily renters, as opposed to owners, may not be able to install smart thermostats. Now, you have a number of platform providers offering smart energy services to MDU property managers, and some of the value propositions commonly proposed for different energy devices are outlined here on this slide. So we see things like automatically adjusting temperatures for smart thermostats. This is when the unit is unoccupied to save energy, and helping to identify system issues that lead to energy waste or could lead to HVAC issues. Then both of these value propositions, by the way, are helping to reduce those operating expenses. Then for smart lights, we see things like managing the use of lights in unoccupied units, remotely preparing the room for viewings, and also varying the lighting color settings to enhance the aesthetic appeal. So these three offerings offer very different value propositions. I would say the first two definitely work to reduce operating expenses, while the third offers some level of product differentiation. For smart plugs, the value propositions here, these both kind of work to reduce operating expenses. Now, on the consumer side, the value propositions offered for the same devices are a little different. For smart thermostats, we see where the tenant benefits promoted are the ability to remotely control the thermostats and the ability to create preset temperature schedules. Both of these, I would say, drive convenience and also energy savings for residents. And then for lights, the main value promoted here is for tenants, is the ability to control the lights, which would be convenience on the most part. Now, there are a number of platform providers offering services, including the ones here on the slide. many of which have been in the market for some time and are now expanding the portfolio and services offered in space. And we even recently had a couple of Smart Rent and Latch who have recently announced plans to go public. So lots of opportunity in this space. We also want to get a sense of what consumers would be willing to pay for these solutions. We see where they have these devices, and we're seeing where builders and property managers think there's good tenant value here. So we focus specifically here on a few energy management solutions. We see where about a third of renters believe that if they were to be provided with these smart solutions, then they should be free, right? But what that also means is that 70% of renters are willing to pay something for these solutions. And we can also see where approximately 40% are willing to pay a substantial amount, which is that over $11 in addition per month. So that's a good indication that consumers do perceive some level of value here. All right, so we see where smart home devices can provide a number of benefits to property managers and residents. However, there are a number of challenges which can threaten market success of these solutions. So one factor is that there is still a significant amount of integration required for these devices to work as they should. And then also to get these devices working with the property management platforms that these properties are already using. Then there is security and privacy concerns, and that can also be a challenge because connected devices are inherently vulnerable to security and privacy threats, as well as some residents may have concerns about the property having access to the data on their devices. Technical support can also be an issue. Some applications often involve a high level of complexity in order to get them to work, and property managers may not have those expertise to troubleshoot those issues when they arise. And then, of course, Wi-Fi challenges can be a problem too, because many residents just do not have the reliable level of Wi-Fi to get these services working as they should. All right, so I will pause here for a quick second just to see if there are any questions on that. Any questions that popped up? All right, so I don't see any questions. So what I will do now is to introduce our Visionary Insights speaker, which is Dhruva Rajendra, the Chief Product Officer of Latch. And Latch entered the space as a lock manufacturer back in 2014 and has since expanded their offering to offer a number of other devices and even a smart home platform as well. So Dhruva, I'm going to ask you to take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I am, as you mentioned earlier, I'm excited to actually attend one of these in person, which it seems like could be true here soon. And also a quick shout out on the data. That data was really interesting. I was taking a lot of notes there. So I want to talk a little bit about how we've been thinking about the space unfolding over the next few years. And I think one of the things that we believe is that a lot of things are about to change, but also not much is changing. And what I mean by that is the needs and the demands of end residents and of our landlord partners are going to continue to expand and grow, which has been true for a very long time. But there's a lot of things happening within the smart energy space that we believe will change. Oh, is something wrong with my audio? Oh, nope, sorry. Yeah, a lot of things are happening that I think will change how we think about this market kind of end to end. There are three themes that I think are really key to hit on. And again, a few folks have already hit on this. I think the emergence of a more vocal consumer in the form of a resident in this market is really going to drive some change. There's basically $500 billion in energy spend over the next 10 years that, that relationship between the utility providers, the resident, and the landlord will start to change. And the way we think about it is there's disruption kind of up and down the energy stack, if you will. So let's start on that last point first. So the energy stack, when I think about that, there's really three key pillars. So first, there's energy generation, then there's storage, and then finally kind of consumption. And again, I think one thing that is going to be true in this market is that each of these components are going to evolve in small ways and big ways, and a lot of experimentation over the next sort of 10 years. So starting with the generation of power, I mean, the world is absolutely moving to new paradigms of energy creation and generation. Last year, about 75% of the new electrical capacity that was added in the US was actually done in a renewable way, solar, wind, etc. So this is part of an overall trend that I think a few speakers have already hit on, that we're moving to a more sustainable kind of energy way of thinking about our energy. I think over the next 10 years, one thought that we've been thinking about is, as generation starts to shift maybe away from traditional providers, there will probably be more opportunities for our landlord partners to offer direct services to residents. And I think, frankly, the residents also will want to be closer to who's generating their power, understand where it's coming from, things like that. You're seeing some of this kind of emerge. You've seen companies like Arcadia Power and Rhythm in Texas start to explore this through the vehicle of retail energy. And we think, again, if you look at this over 10 years, this specific category will continue to evolve. Next, we have storage. I think there's a lot of kind of experimentation happening in storage. We mentioned the Texas situation earlier in the talks here. When we've been thinking about storage, I think a lot about what I've seen abroad, where storage is kind of mission critical, frankly, in places like India, where you actually need bigger storage capacity to account for the fact that the grid isn't always reliable. And as we add more devices to the grid, I mean, I don't think that the United States will ever be in a state where we need, storage just to keep the lights on, if you will. But again, I think consumers will want to understand, how do I keep power in a more local sense? How do I avoid a situation like Texas, et cetera? So summing up those last two components, I think there will be a lot of kind of experimentation on that kind of infrastructure layer. But that brings us to kind of the big driver that I think many of the companies you're going to hear about, from whether it's Sean at Point Central or others, will talk about, and that's specifically influencing kind of consumption habits. So this is the consumer bucket, and how can we, again, work on this energy problem together? So starting with the end user, and again, some of the I think there was some great data in that last section about this. We've been talking a lot, not just within the energy context, but I think across our platform, about this new generation that is kind of moving into the apartment category and MDU category. So, a lot of folks think about millennials and Gen Z, and, people, I don't know how aware people are of the numbers, but Gen Z and millennials are about the same size. So what I like to say is, you take whatever millennials want and expand it almost in scope, if you will, by 2x when Gen Z comes on. And just as an aside, if you want to feel old for the day, the oldest Gen Xer was born in, or Gen Zer was born in 1997, which means that this year they will turn 24. And so they're definitely entering this market very, very quickly. And so what that means is you've got a generation of customers who kind of have a different expectation level when it comes to how their energy footprint is managed, and what their touch points are with their energy portfolio. I mean, this is basically a generation that's grown up with Teslas on every street corner. They really believe that the future is going to look a lot different from an energy perspective. And I think that customer expectation is going to continue to rise. So where is this all going? I think that over time, I've been looking for kind of analogies to kind of explain where I think this specific part about how a consumer thinks about their energy footprint is going. And one of the ones I keep coming back to is the first time I opened Mint, the financial services app, about 10, 12 years ago, I think. And it was really interesting to kind of see your entire financial life just in one app, unified across your bank, your credit card, et cetera. I think you're going to see something similar within the energy kind of context, where the devices you manage on a day-to-day basis, maybe the electric vehicle you drive, all of that energy footprint that you're creating is actually pulled into one place, so that you as a consumer can kind of understand the decisions you're making on a day-to-day basis and do things about it. Now, in order to enable that, you need to continue to kind of unify these experiences, bring them into one app, and make it somewhere that users kind of want to go. And I think if you do that, users will start to do the things we want them to do. So spend, be more efficient with their energy spend. Think about turning the thermostat off, at different points in the day, things like that. And so if we're really able to do all these things, I think that will also feed, the landlord and property managers' needs as well, which is to kind of drive efficiency while also driving differentiation for their building. So over the next 10 years, there are a lot of specifics that I think will have to be worked out. I think a lot of experimentation will happen. I frankly think it's an incredibly exciting time to be in this space. But I think, again, the thing I would leave you with is that, this market isn't just about adding one more thermostat integration or one more kind of point solution. It's really thinking about the entire stack and weighing that against where the consumer mind is going when it comes to managing their own energy footprint. That's all I got.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Driva. So I did have a couple of questions which really tie into some of what you were talking about just now. So I know you focused a lot on energy management and, just some of the digital strategies to help consumers to manage their energy better. So in looking at on the MDU side of things and some of the benefits that we talked about for property managers and consumers and so on, it's not just energy. There are quite a few that are coming up, right? And there's the access management. There's, of course, just differentiation, which allows to attract new residents, tenant acquisition, and stuff like that, and of course tenant retention, that kind of thing. So just trying to get a sense from you where the energy management value proposition sort of stack up in all of those.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, going back to when we started Latch, you tended to find that customers thought about investing in us in one of really two buckets, right? Either we were saving them operational efficiencies, or this was an amenity to help move units more quickly. And what I've started to notice is there's kind of this third kind of category emerging where folks are using this as a way to almost tailor their offering to specific customer segments. So I think a really good example is actually here in DC, Avalon Bay has a new brand called Conso, where they've definitely figured out different ways using Latch, using Nest thermostats, and a bunch of other kind of technology providers to really lower the to reduce operational efficiencies. But when you show up at the building, I mean, it feels like one of the best buildings you've ever walked in. The amenity feel is really, really high. And so they've been able to kind of pull both of these things together in a vision that is pretty coherent. And I think there's going to be this third bucket of, hey, we're going to use technology to tailor ourselves to a customer segment. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Okay, so is there any one then of all the smart solutions that we mentioned that come with the different categories, access, safety, those that mitigate risk, and those that provide that level of differentiation, is there any one that you think is driving that business case for reducing operating expenses more than the others?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we get it a lot. And what I find when talking with customers is it can be very driven by, their situation, right? So like a high rise in Manhattan is definitely different than, a property in Dallas is definitely different than something in Denver, et cetera, et cetera. So what I find is that it's often it really, really depends just kind of on the property, what they're trying to achieve, and kind of working backwards from which parts of our platform most align with what they're trying to accomplish.
So it really depends. All right. Yeah. So if we're looking at that energy management then value proposition specifically, is there like a tipping point? And I've seen a number of different energy savings being promoted, whether it is per unit, whether it's 15 to 20% per month on your typical energy spend. Is there when you're talking to property managers, is there a particular tipping point that gets their attention? Which value then, dollar amount, starts to get their attention?
Yeah. Again, it does depend. I've found folks who are excited by low single digit percentages, which makes it very easy to kind of work backwards from which works from us. And then there are others who are trying to make like those big 10, 15, 20% type improvements. And we honestly have served a little bit of both. I think one thing that's interesting too, as we kind of, I mean, I think everyone that's coming behind me will also probably back up, is that a lot of these customers are different kind of phases of their investment in this world. So many of them who are earlier, I mean, sometimes their skepticism might be a little bit higher, but even just showing some quick wins can often get them moving. And a few percentage points can then accumulate to them, seeing the value of investing in this technology. So kind of a little bit of trying to split the difference there, but yeah.
So again, it really depends.
Really depends. Every building's different, and a lot of, like a lot of property managers just have different goals. I mean, we faced some folks really, really want to push the edge of what's possible, and then others, really just want to solve a couple quick things and say they invested in technology and kind of need to be brought along for the ride.
Right. And so you've been in this space for a while, and as I mentioned in your intro, you've really expanded from, locks into offering an entire platform now. So, I'm sure that took some time and planning and, evaluation of what you've done so far and where you should be going. So just thinking about that, what do you think are some of the most important lessons that you've learned from when you started out doing locks and approaching property managers to now that you're providing that platform?
Yeah, you forgot a lot of pain along the way as well. But yeah, I mean, I definitely don't need to bring up the flexibility approach, which is you can't just assume one thing is going to fit for all of them. I think there are two key lessons, I think, from a product experience standpoint that seem to come up over and over again. So I think one is we talk a lot about this internally, but every app, every experience, every feature, we need to think about. I don't know if you've heard of the toothbrush test. So I think this was popularized by Google, but basically when they were evaluating a new feature, the test they would do for it was, do you use it more than a toothbrush in a day? And I believe you're supposed to brush your teeth twice, so that means, do you use this thing more than twice a day? And so we've tried to apply that in the new categories we've expanded to, because it's a good heuristic, I feel, for what's going to become, what is frankly valuable for that end customer versus something that isn't going to be kind of embedded in their life, and therefore it's something maybe we want to work on later or reintroduce at a further time. So that's one piece. And then I think the other thing is, look, when onboarding is very, very critical for these experiences. So getting that right, getting that first aha moment, if you will, from an end user, I think is super important, because if for us, if somebody approaches our building for the first time and access doesn't work, they might give you a second or third chance, but the likelihood of that drops dramatically basically after that first failed attempt. And so for us, that onboarding experience, getting them to that aha moment of, wow, this is truly better from a resident perspective, is really key. And especially on both of those, actually, same deal goes kind of for the property owner as well.
Right. So you mentioned that user experience. That's one of the things we were talking about first, and that kind of stood out to you. And I know that the app experience plays a huge role in that user experience and how often they're willing to use the product to begin with. So have you learned any specific lessons about designing that whole app interface that you can share with us? Anything useful there? Any painful lessons that were learned?
More pain, yeah. Yeah, I feel like I need a couch for this. No, I think that the key really is, we're a company that thinks a lot about design, and I think the wrong approach is to think it's just about pixels and making it look pretty or any of that, right? It's really about kind of remembering that, especially in our category, right? These products actually live in the real world. They're solving real world problems, specifically access, smart home, etc. Like, these are things that people are using on a day-to-day basis. And so, I think a lot of folks kind of forget that often, that this is something that, yes, it's certainly about making a design that users are excited to open every day and interact with, but you can't forget that they're interacting with the physical space around them, and if those experiences are inconsistent, that's when you really lose them. So yeah, it has to be certainly well designed from a pixel perspective, but it also has to respect where it lives in the real world, and the experience has to work pretty much all the time, because users have short attention spans these days, and we think a lot about, well, that again, they might be okay with us missing an unlock here or there, but you don't want to have that happen too many times.
Yeah, and for me, even beyond consistency, it's good to have consistency, because then you have those learnings that you can apply to do anything else that you want to do. But beyond that, for me, I value into the app experience being intuitive more than anything else.
Yeah.
Once it's easy to figure out and I can easily navigate to whatever I need to navigate to, even more so than aesthetics, I just needed to be able to find exactly what I need to do and get it to do that very easily, and I'll be good.
Do not over design what is supposed to be simple. I was looking at a deck someone on our team did, and they were kind of comparing a smart light bulb, right, to what it looks like. So basically, like, a smart light bulb if I just install a light bulb around off my shoulder here, right? That works pretty much 100% of the time, right? And that is actually your competitor, or if you will, or like that's the experience the user is used to. So when you introduce a smart light bulb or a smart light switch, it better be able to compete with what the status quo has been for a century, right? And I think sometimes, especially I know I'm guilty of this sometimes. I think about like, okay, like it works, it's good enough, but it's like it's got to be even better than what folks are used to. Otherwise, again, you won't get the adoption.
Yeah, yeah. And the other piece of that you mentioned was, of course, a good onboarding experience. That onboarding is a huge umbrella term that takes into account a number of different pieces. So wanting you to dive into that a little bit more, like what does a good onboarding experience look like? Does that mean that you go to every single resident and demonstrate to them how the app works and what their device
that would be hard. No,
what makes a good onboarding experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think so one of the people who invested in our company, Chamath Palapatiya, he brought so he has this concept when I think he was at Facebook at the time that he introduced this, where users are roughly end users that is are roughly in one of, I think it's 3 frames of mind. They're either unaware of your product, they're aware of your product, or they've kind of had this aha moment with your product and are starting to use it over and over again, right? And so for him, the aha moment came when someone logged into Facebook, got 10 friends, and then all of a sudden they saw photos coming in and things like that. And they kind of understood, intuitively why Facebook was a big deal, if you will. And so for us, we're kind of attacking the aha moment, right? So I think from a design context, some folks think onboarding is as simple as just, a checklist, right? Like, okay, the user, unlocked a door for the first time, they interacted with the thermostat. Okay, we're done. That's not quite right? And it's got to be that they do all those things, yes, but then they flip into a mode of they're using the app, over 4 times a day because they've just found it kind of totally indispensable. For us specifically, I mean, again, having started in access and having built what I think is a very, very good, compelling access product, that aha moment happens pretty quickly, right? It's the first time you let someone in for the first time, or after a few days of saying, you know what, I'm going to leave my keys at home. I'm just going to take out my product. It's funny, we got one of the newer lock formats on my house. My wife is anti smart devices, period. Like it's not. She was very mad at me for installing it on our very nice door. But after a day or so, she's like, "Yeah, this is great. We can't actually." I was gonna send it back, and she was like, "No, keep that cool little lock there." So yeah.
The convenience sort of won her over there.
The convenience, and it's like the first time she went out for a walk, had it on her, had her phone on her, right, instead of her keys, and that was kind of that was it, right?
Nice. Okay. Yeah. All right. So we've been living in this, I guess, COVID-19 world for a little bit now, in excess of a year, and yes. I was trying to get a sense of whether or not there's some spaces I know that it impacts more than others. But I mean, are you seeing any kind of an impact in the space, whether it is, residents or property managers valuing any of those smart value propositions any more than they had in the past? Energy management, people are at home now, that could be a factor. Do you see any change that you can definitely attribute or associate with people dealing with COVID-19?
Well, you stole one of mine, which is definitely that when people are working at home more, energy patterns are going to shift. We're seeing some developers trying to figure out, can we build like mini office suites within our apartment to account for folks who are going to be permanently remote or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely one piece. I think for some of our customers, we, call it the slower adopters, right? They have now, they're living in this world with the rest of us. So a lot less skepticism on the future of having kind of a smart building than maybe before. And I mean, intuitively, that I think kind of makes sense, right? And then the other thing, and this kind of goes back to I think what some other folks had said prior, there has been this interesting growth, if you will, and interest in electric vehicles, in sort of living in a more sustainable way in the last year and a half. And again, another intuitive trend. But if you look at there's a lot of data actually to back that up. And I think that's the other thing is folks really feel like they're, at least in the MDU space, their end customers are starting to ask for these kinds of things more and more.
Okay, great. And one more question for me before we get into the audience questions. So wanting to check with you again on the different types of MDU properties. Are you seeing any sort of evolution in their needs as it relates to smart products? And I'm talking about the assisted living facilities or the student dorms or any kind of specialized MDUs. Are you seeing any differences in their smart product needs?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the COVID-19 question, right? So I think in some of the segments that we had been playing in, we're certainly starting to see accelerated excitement, let's say, around, hey, now we actually probably we're good to talk now, kind of thing. That's certainly happening more and more. You mentioned, yeah, I mean, student housing is a market that we've served a little bit, but I think we're going to have more demand kind of growing over here in the next few months. But yeah, I think similar to your question about COVID-19, we're just seeing kind of acceleration everywhere.
You're seeing more of an openness driven by COVID-19. What do you think that is? Is that basically for the energy management aspect of it, that I'm paying so much more, so I'm now more open to the idea? What else about it is making these buildings more open?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not necessarily in the scene. Well, I mean, across them, it's that first moment when you realize that you maybe can't actually be in person for certain things to go happen. I mean, sounds simple, but that feels like what comes up over and over again. Like, hey, I finally got it. Like, I didn't want to have to drive down to X, Y, and Z property and flip the light switch back on or off, rather, not keep it on, keep it off, lock the door, etc. So I think it's like we all have this collective moment where we realized why all these remote tools are so powerful.
Right. It's a whole new openness to technology since we all were forced to use it.
Yeah.
In the past.
No, and it's funny. So like our sales team, again, very, very standard was they would go show up, we would do a lot of these phone calls, and Zoom was not, I don't have numbers, but like it was definitely not the primary way of interacting with our customers. And 12 months, that ratio completely flipped.
Yep. All right, well, let me hop on over to these audience questions and see what our audience is thinking. So the first one is, what partnerships are having the biggest impact for Latch right now?
Yeah. So I think that the partnerships we've done, a lot of partnerships are doing well, and you're going to get me in trouble because I'm going to forget someone and then they're going to yell at me after this. No, I mean, look, no surprise, like one of the bigger ones is definitely especially around smart energy. We've seen a lot of activity on like their smart thermostats, lighting, like a lot of the ones that kind of intersect the smart home. A lot of folks have been wanting to partner with us really for two primary reasons, right? So one is we feel like we've done a really good job from a kind of like data privacy, data governance standpoint. So they feel like we're a trusted partner that they can go to market with. And then the second component is that, we have pretty good app usage. And so if they're trying to drive adoption of, their device or their solution, we can hopefully play a big piece in that through our platform.
All right, wonderful. All right, we do have other questions, so let me hop on over. So what company do you see providing that full energy footprint view?
Yeah, no, it's I get that question. So it's interesting. There are a couple companies so I'll split this out into kind of like the sort of smart home solutions companies and then who's providing the view. The smart home solutions providers, we're all still, I think, we're in a state where we're deploying this technology. We're in the like deployment phase, right? So we're getting this technology out there. I think each company is probably looking at their data and saying, okay, there's some interesting insights we can start to drive. So we're on our own path to kind of, going from install to application, if you will. There are a host of interesting companies I've seen recently that are, some of them actually are sponsors, who are doing things with energy data to kind of unify it. I haven't seen anyone come out and become the killer mint.com type app yet. Maybe I've missed it, but I've seen a few folks getting closer and closer to, providing data feeds to the utility companies or providing the ability to, you know, better manage demand response and things like that. But I haven't seen anyone just say, hey, this is the one experience, if you will.
All right, got it. All right, I can take one more question and then we'll have to move over to our executive spotlight. So the other question is appliance HVAC monitoring, fault detection, and important value propositions for MDU when the tenant is actually paying their own energy bills?
I believe it's important to integrate it from, I mean, so we take the perspective that the tenant experience, like a better tenant experience, will lead to all the outcomes that kind of a landlord wants. So I think absolutely, if I understood the question right, that integrating those into the ecosystem is critical to having kind of the end-to-end experience.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Drva, for providing that good insight and kind of giving us some back-end insight into how Latch is sort of reimagining the smart solution space or smart home space for MDUs. And right now, we will go ahead and transition to our executive spotlight, and that will be led by Elizabeth Parks, and it will feature Sean Miller from Point Central. All right, we'll catch you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great. So thank you so much. That was awesome information from Latch's Chief Product Officer. Thanks again for joining us today. I'm Elizabeth Parks, the president of Parks Associates, and we're really pleased to have you joining our conversation at our 12th annual Smart Energy Summit. Today, we have joining us Sean Miller, president of Point Central, an alarm.com company serving short and long-term residential property managers with smart property solutions. We're going to jump right in today. We've got about 30 minutes to chat with Sean. As a reminder, please go ahead and send any questions through to the Q&A or the chat at any time, and we're going to be incorporating those questions into the conversation as we go. There's really so much to talk about, and we want to focus in today on this massive spotlight on the MDU market as a huge opportunity to embed technology into buildings and apartments for all sorts of good reasons. So I'm looking forward to our discussion, and for our audience, a quick summary. We're going to focus on the current and future role of platforms for property managers, and especially the role that energy plays in these platforms. We're going to talk about the impact of coronavirus on the industry and for the consumer, the role of broadband in multifamily properties, the user experience for property managers and consumers, and really what we expect to see in the next 3 to 5 years. So Sean, thank you so much for being here today. And let's go ahead and start and see if you can do a short introduction on yourself and Point Central.
Hi, Elizabeth. Well, pleasure to be here today. Thank you. So I'll just jump into, I'll start with Point Central. I think it's easier to talk about what we all do here. So when we look into the future, since we started 10 years ago, we've sort of saw a world where residential properties are all connected. Now, I've personally been around connected technologies for about 10 years. So I don't say connected just simply for being connected sake, but because we think being connected allows property automation platforms to understand what's going on and help residents and property managers take appropriate actions. The reason why we want to do this, sort of our mission, is we want to help save resources. So whether that resource is money, time, energy, or water, we feel smart property platforms help all stakeholders protect and grow the resources that matter to them. We sort of bring this vision into life across a couple categories. I think we'll probably dive into in our conversation, so I'll keep these high level. But generally things like access, when you think of resident locks, intercoms, and common area access control to do things like curb to couch access or deliveries, self-showings, etc. We look at things like water and understand if there's leaks and how consumption's going, and even look for things like humidity to help protect the asset. And then we also look at energy, not only to help residents and operators save money, but also try and help save some time and understand how things are operating.
So that's great. Thanks for that intro. And let's go ahead and dive a little bit deeper into some of those core value propositions that are being led with the addition of technology into new buildings. So our latest research shows that 43% of MDU residents now own a smart home device, up from 30% in 2019. So certainly a growing market that is being driven by the properties and their integration of different services. But when we look at energy, let's dive a little bit deeper specifically into HVAC and monitoring and the role that that can play for efficiencies for a property.
Yeah, so I think Patrice mentioned in her piece before that thermostats and MDUs maybe aren't as high on the list as in single family rentals, but if we look across rental properties and even owned properties, thermostats are one of the first devices consumers think about because there's a very discernible advantage or benefit to them, right? They save money on their heating and cooling bills. So in our example with the alarm.com thermostat, people save anywhere from 15 to 23% depending on the season in their system. That's real money in residents' pocket, and they sort of understand what that does for them. To the operators, they get similar savings when a unit is unoccupied. They can even get more if they've had problems with when work orders are being completed and people come in and maybe adjust the thermostat down or up depending on the season, and then it runs for a couple weeks. The savings can really stack up there. But we think outside of just the direct energy savings, where HVAC has really big potential is sort of helping to save time. And sort of how we did that was back in 2018, we launched an HVAC analytics algorithm that essentially looked for HVAC problems before they became a problem. So in the MDU world, a problem means before a resident called you complaining that their thermostat wasn't working the first day of summer when it was really hot, or the first day of winter when it got really cold. Last year, we launched, in addition to that program, a second algorithm that looked for critical issues. So while the first algorithm was looking for general problems and sort of alerting it to operators so they can get in front of those and schedule maintenance at a time that maybe was less costly without disrupting the resident, the second algorithm started scanning through those and really looking for issues that were going to cause big problems in the near term. So essentially helping operators prioritize which units they went to first. We're happy to say that in last year alone, we helped operators find over 360,000 HVAC issues, which we think is a great step in helping property managers be more efficient by shifting their work orders from reactive to proactive.
Well, that's great and really interesting about how predictive analytics can play such a big role in operational efficiencies. As you're talking with potential clients, are you leading with that ROI in the end, or what's that sort of top thing that you're saying that property managers, by investing in this technology, is it the savings that comes out in the end for them? Is it the experience for the consumer? What are those top drivers in your selling proposition?
Yes, so ROI definitely comes up in the conversation, but I think to Rua's point earlier, a lot of this is starting to become really what matters to that property manager and that building and the residents within it. Some buildings will have a really green approach, and talking about how you can save energy or save water consumption is really important to them. Other buildings, maybe trying to just generally add smart home amenities because people want to stay there. And then other buildings are just looking to help, especially through the last 12 months, we've all seen a lot of deliveries and self-showings become a big important part of where we live. And some buildings are just trying to take that workload off of their staff of shoving packages into package rooms or, letting people in, et cetera.
So clearly there are a list really of things that technology can do. And, I think as we heard from Latch earlier, there's really a reinvention or a reimagination of what technology can do, not only for the person living in a multifamily or an apartment type of setting, but also for those property managers. Let's talk a little bit about water leaks. So we've been covering the water leak detection space now for a few years since those products have been rolling out. Can you share a little bit about this type of offering and the role that can play for a property?
Yeah, I think as people have started to see that these IoT devices can be deployed and be more than just a resident amenity, that they can also help drive an ROI from the operational efficiencies and asset protection. Water, after HVAC, water is sort of the next category we think people are really becoming aware of, because a water leak in an MDU environment can easily cost $2,000 to $7,000 when you think of just cost to clean up and remediation. And that's if the leak is caught probably quickly. If that leak turns into a waterfall down through several units, it just grows exponentially. The good thing about water is a lot of these can sort of be caught early through leak detectors and water valves that when they're out there, can again easily detect overconsumption or small pinhole leaks or leaks in a particular area, and help the property manager know about them and take action, or even help automate action based on rules a property manager can set. So we think water will be a big thing to sort of help save operators money from avoiding leak damage. But then back to the sort of conservation theme for residents, they can also start to help the residents understand their consumption and change their behaviors if they're so inclined.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that we're certainly seeing the sort of clean energy proposition really driving consumers' interest in single-family homes as well as in multifamily. So just the nature of the savings and that impact that the consumer can have just by leasing or renting a unit that's got these types of products in it, I think is going to continue to grow as people pay more and more attention to their energy use. And that really leads us to kind of talking about maybe some of the future things that Point Central might be looking at, particularly in the role of energy management and utilities with demand response programs. Is there anything there that you might want to comment on and share with our audience?
Yeah, so today, we don't see a lot of demand for DERMS. We have our thermostats Energy Star certified. So we have utility partners that give rebates, and we list those on our website to help owners and operators get those rebates. We haven't heard a lot of residents ask for DERMS programs. We think that's mostly because of a lack of awareness. They don't understand it. Typically, DERMS becomes more familiar to them when they buy a home and move into it. The good news for us is we have a sister company, Energy Hub, that plays and is a leader in the DERMS space, and we stay pretty close to them on understanding what are residents looking for, what are general consumers looking for, what are the energy utilities looking for, and we're excited that we think sometime in the near future those will start to meet up and provide even additional benefits to residents and operators. There's also sorry, go ahead, Elizabeth.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say also related to energy, there's HVAC. So besides the savings, with everyone spending more time at home, we saw some people, say, how else can I save more energy? And one of the things we've been thinking about is, just simple things like filtration. How do you help encourage the behaviors that people can take that help them save more energy and live a better life?
Well, and that's great to talk a little bit about air filtration, because we certainly have been doing a lot of research on indoor air quality solutions. And as a result of COVID, that's actually becoming quite top of mind for consumers in thinking about their air quality in their homes, and certainly seeing a market for consumers to use technology that will help assure them that there is good air quality. And actually, our research is showing that a third of consumers have some kind of health condition that can be impacted with air quality. So, even those triggers of just go change your filter can go a long way. But are there other more advanced technologies that you all see coming sort of down the pipe as we move ahead in coming months?
Yeah, when you think of air quality, to us, that sort of is part of a bigger theme of general, health and wellness. So wellness is something that our parent company Alarms, we've been investing in since 2014 and building out sort of a suite of products that in our space, in the multifamily or residential rental world, we think is really applicable for a couple of reasons. It can obviously fit into some specific asset classes like, healthcare facilities, et cetera. But we also think there's a growing trend where people just want to be more aware of their health, and maybe if they're at a stage where they need a little more care, still live in the place they want, but have the technology there to help them. And so we think aging in place wellness solutions will be really a big part of helping provide sort of the flexible living that residents are looking for and that operators want to provide, so that they get more and more demand for their assets.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. I actually listened to a webinar earlier today about from some hospitals, and they were the two chief executives talking about the healthcare to home phenomenon and how that really is where we're going with healthcare, and lots to figure out there on the healthcare reimbursement side, but also great for consumers to be able to get healthcare services and really wellness and monitoring at home. We definitely see that in the future as well. I do have a question from the audience, though, so I want to grab this real quick. So apartments with smart thermostats are another avenue for utilities to increase their demand response portfolio. How do you see working with utilities as a channel to increase smart home adoption? And I know you just said that this is something you guys are really just looking at, but would love to answer this question for our audience.
Yeah, so we've actually had some relationships with utilities where in certain markets where the utility wants to drive, say, adoption of an energy program like DERMS, or just, using Energy Star thermostats, the utility will get involved and provide maybe additional rebates or incentives to the owners and operators to install the product, and then maybe to the resident to use it. So completely agree with the audience question there, that it is an opportunity. The good thing for us is that thermostat already sort of works with those programs. For us, the only thing to deploying or turning those features on more and more is just residents and operators asking for it.
Sure. Okay. Let's shift over a little bit and talk about the building owner or property management's perspective on this kind of technology getting integrated. What's your experience with the biggest hangups? Is it the integration of everything? Is it the cost? Is it, what are the things that are maybe obstacles or barriers for properties to integrate new technology?
Yeah, so as all your participants on today's session probably can attest to, MDUs have a very rigid budgeting process at a certain time of year when they budget, and then a certain time of year when they spend. And so you have to figure out how to get into that cycle, and things like ROI and benefits play a part of that. So there is definitely just a budgeting process that's part of it. But I think as people are looking more at the space, they're also starting to ask themselves more, what do we want out of this, right? A couple of years ago, I think people used to just slap a thermostat on the wall and said, well, we have a smart apartment and we're good, and move forward. And there wasn't a lot of measurement of what that actually did. And I think today people are understanding that if I put this device in, or maybe a slightly larger portfolio of devices, I can not only deliver the amenity the resident wants, but the operational efficiencies and the asset protection. Which are those that I care most about? Let's start there. And then also looking at their organizations to understand what are the processes we need. We need this system to support, but that they also need maybe to enhance or change as part of they're going to use some of this technology. So, for example, the water sensors I mentioned in 2020, it's newer for us, so it's not as significant as the HVAC, but we still caught 50,000 water leaks in 2020. Just sitting there and working with the on-site staff and the maintenance staff to say, where do you want these notifications to go, right? They're not used to knowing about a water leak until a resident usually picks up the phone and says that there's a leak and there's an emergency. So how do you deliver that over an email or text? What about if you can catch that leak early and shut it off? Should we just shut it off or not? So there's definitely conversations that sort of go along that greater theme of how does the operator want this technology to work within their processes today?
Yeah, and I'm sure that's a challenge because probably many of those properties don't understand technology and may not even have the personnel. I would imagine there are sort of new chief technology people that are charged with the procurement process and evaluating technologies and the investments there. But 20 years ago, everything was a little more straightforward, not as many opportunities to integrate. But that speaks to broadband and the role that broadband services play in the MDU market. Without broadband, without Wi-Fi, without that infrastructure built in, you really have some big problems. So let's see if we can talk a little bit about broadband services and look specifically at new buildings versus retrofit. So tell me a little bit about your experience with understanding properties and what that role of broadband is as it relates to y'all's solution.
Yeah. So broadband has work from home over the last 12 months. I think has accelerated the broadband conversation as everyone needed good broadband to participate on calls like this. As work from home subsides, there may be some settling in that demand, but I do think, high-speed internet is just a general amenity people want. So expect to see that going forward. In sort of the new buildings versus retrofits, running broadband to a new building and setting up access points throughout that is easier in a new building because you can work it into the design. In a retrofit, probably costs a little bit more just because you have to think through how you're going to retrofit that. I think one of the things that people are also thinking through when you think about broadband and the IoT devices being a part of that, our stance is, every time we install something, we have a cellular-based hub that is sort of gives us a cellular network in a box that all those devices can connect to and use as their primary communication path out. So broadband to us enhances that, but we don't need it to be in the buildings. And that gives us a lot of flexibility to work across new or retrofit construction. New construction or retrofit opportunities. But when people are thinking about it, there's also things they're starting to consider, right, is broadband just higher demand and being used potentially for things like IoT devices is how do they manage that network? Who's going to sort of make sure that network from devices get firmware updates, security, passwords, all those things. Like it's not as simple as just to throw a network up and then let it run for 5 or 10 years until you have to replace the hardware. And also Wi-Fi can carry unique challenges to IoT devices, whether it's making sure that things are secure or power consumption that isn't as good for battery devices. Broadband brings a lot of benefits, but I don't think it's a necessary need to have for IoT platforms.
Well, certainly that cellular technology plays, the critical role within your solution. But overall, the expectation for consumers to have internet and broadband and ultimately to have devices that work, I think is the really important part, and that reliability there, in that solution is great to consider as well. Let's talk a little bit about COVID-19 and some of the very specific changes that you saw with property management. Earlier, you mentioned the property viewing and also access to buildings, some of the benefits that property managers saw. But can you maybe describe how quickly things shifted and changed? I mean, a year ago, the world was kind of at a halt and everybody was trying to figure out, what is going on? What are we going to do here? Everybody's now at home. We have to work at home. People are losing their jobs. What did the property manager industry and multifamily industry, how did they respond to COVID?
Yeah, so March of 2020, so Punch Rental, if I step back really quick, we work with the entire residential property management space. You can think multifamily assets or single family assets, short-term rentals and long-term. So March 2020 of last year, that entire market froze as everyone wanted to understand what was going to be the impact of COVID. Short-term rentals actually unthawed pretty quick, and we saw people wanting to get out of their homes and get some space. Long-term rentals and took a little bit while longer to unthaw as they figured out sort of what does this mean to us. Multifamily in particular sort of really woke up to self-showing. So we started self-showings 5 years ago on the single family rental side. And for most of the time up to that point, a lot of multifamily operators used to tell us, single family is needed, or multifamily operators used to tell us self-showings is needed for single family because you have these disparate assets all over. But in a multifamily building, there's an on-site manager and people show up, and giving the tour is part of the experience. Then COVID hit, and suddenly you couldn't give a tour, but you still had vacancies. And so self-showing suddenly became a tool. Everyone understand, how can I use this? How can I turn it on? And then that led to, okay, depending on if you're a garden style walk-up where people could get through, great. You can just send them a code and they get in that front door. But if you're a mid-rise or a high-rise that had an intercom, a common area access system, how do you extend self-showings to work on those types of products? And so from our standpoint, that was rolling out connected intercom solutions and connected access control to sort of make sure we can deliver that seamless curb to couch access. And then, as people looked at then the access, again, then self-showings was one part of it, but how do I handle with all these deliveries, whether they're package deliveries, food deliveries, et cetera? Things were showing up and getting, couldn't always get to where they needed to be. And it really accelerated MDU operators thinking about what can they do from a property automation standpoint that really solves the access problem for where most of their access systems are offline and something they can't control in real time.
Well, sure. And do you think that these self-showings, you said you've been doing this for 5 years before COVID, then it hit, now it's become a very popular way to show off rental properties. Do you think this is here to stay? Do you think this will take over that in-person viewing? This is the question that a lot of industries are asking, even about conferences. Will we go back to in-person, or is virtual enough to satisfy the business need of networking? So how do you see that future for apartment showings?
Yeah, I think it will be part of the new normal. It won't completely replace it. So again, depending on the building, an A-class building with good amenities, you're probably still going to have a personal touch that goes along with it. But other class buildings, they may be totally fine having most of their showings be self-sufficient. They may augment them, but it does allow for things, even in a non-pandemic time. Self-showings drove a lot of efficiencies where people could get in and see units that weren't available at times when maybe the staff wasn't there or typically didn't do it, or that was more convenient for the resident. So what they saw was more people coming in, which typically led to higher quality potential residents that they got to then fill the vacancies at market rates that, all worked out well for them. So I think there's benefits to self-showing outside of just there's a pandemic and you need to distance people that will stay a part of this market even as we work into a new world.
Sure. Well, in general, we certainly see the market continuing to shift. And I think as, especially on the integration side with different devices and services, as that continues to come together, things will speed up. But a lot of this technology takes time to develop and to get into the buildings, while the industry is also shifting, which is, I'm sure, a really interesting position for a technology solution to be working on new technology as well as integrating it while you're doing it. But in looking at the future of MDU projects, we certainly see a number of factors influencing the industry. And another one is supply chain issues, raw materials, shortage of chips, potential labor issues in finding people to do the work. So can you tell me, what you think maybe the biggest obstacles are coming in the immediate near future, like this year, for the multifamily space? Are all of these investments going to continue to drive this technology? Do you think this will be stalling out at any point soon? Let me hear a little bit about what you think on that.
Yeah, so sort of the first part you mentioned, Elizabeth, was some of the supply chain disruptions right now. Yes, those are real, whether it's spikes in demand or freight issues or other events. Like there's definitely raw material shortages out there that I think partners like property automation partners have to work with MDU owners and operators to think through and plan for. From our standpoint, we've moved. We manufacture some of our products here in the U.S. We recently moved some additional products back to our U.S. facility. That's allowed us to still have global supply chains, but sort of to make those chains come from several different areas and then control what goes in. So we haven't seen huge hits from it. We also sort of run a very prescriptive ecosystem. So that means the partners we work with, we tend to have really deep relationships with. And if we need to figure out how we make supply chains flex, we can do so. Outside of supply, I think sort of your point on the hindrances earlier, I think what you'll see is people just continue to, a couple years ago, again, I think people used to be hesitant and go, oh, we'll wait till next year. Everything will be cheaper. I don't think they've seen things come down in price the way they thought. That's sort of a retail mechanism. In this space, you've seen things just get better and things go out in the field and live for a long time because of software updates, et cetera. So I think people start to understand that the time is now that they have to do this. Even if they start smaller, they have to start figuring out because everyone around them is. I think they'll also think through things like, how do I do this and not become an in-house IT team, IoT team? And so for us, like we work with sort of partners in market that sort of help handle installation and support and can tie all these things together. We think that grows in sort of value for owners and operators. And then also this was mentioned on the previous one, but data security and privacy. As residents use these more, as operators use them more, they become more aware of what happens with the data. Where does it go? What do you do with it? So we think things like SOC 2 compliance, GDPR compliance, CCPA compliance, all those fun acronyms become more and more important.
Well, that's great. And certainly the integration of products, privacy and security issues are big ones for the industry to continue to address. It's amazing how quickly 30 minutes will go by. This has been an awesome conversation, Sean. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share with our audience. I want to give you the opportunity to leave us with one additional last thought.
Ooh, okay. So last thought will be, I think if you look 3 to 5 years out, outside of things we mentioned, what are some of the fun things that continue to change? Really quick, 3 things. I think video analytics, how you recognize people around it, and that helps make their living experience even better or helps facilitate driving or deliveries is a big thing. Also the gamification, how do you get residents to use this more and pass the toothbrush test that Dhruva mentioned, or maybe even something more loved than a toothbrush. And then I think you'll see just enhancements in connectivity. So there's things like Z-Wave long range and 5G that are coming out that are allowing for these devices to go in scenarios that previously weren't possible, that operators and owners, I think, will start to think through. So overall, we think it's exciting. There's been I think also mentioned before, there's been a lot of interest in this space from sort of some of the partners and SPACs. I think when you look at that interest, that tells you that people are excited about where this is going, and there'll be a lot of opportunities for the players in the space. So we're excited to be here, and I appreciate having time with you here.
Well, awesome. Well, we appreciate your time, and it is an exciting time in the industry. Lots of investment money, lots of big valuations we're seeing. And so again, thank you today for your time. And we will be right back with our interactive panel discussion in just a minute. So thanks for joining us today.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Capice, and I am a Strategic Account Manager for Parks Associates Executive Conferences and Custom Marketing Services. First, I want to thank our sponsors for supporting our event today. Your combined and individual support helps make our events possible. As you may know, Parks Associates is a woman-owned and trusted market research firm with an excellent reputation for our research and executive conferences. While 2020 is a year that we will certainly never forget, it remains our goal in 2021 to serve and support our sponsors through our year-long virtual conferences and custom marketing services. Our conferences offer a unique combination of industry expertise and extensive consumer research and analysis, ensuring sponsors visibility to the right audience of our senior executives throughout the year. Connections, the premier connected home conference, is celebrating its 25th year and hosting more than 1,300 senior executives from the smart home, security, connected health, energy, and home automation industries during sessions throughout the year. Our 12th annual Smart Energy Summit addresses the evolution of the customer utility market, the impact of COVID-19, and new opportunities to drive engagement in utility-sponsored programs and energy-efficient solutions. Parks Associates' 8th annual Connected Health Summit addresses opportunities for connected health solutions to empower consumers, caregivers, and providers to meet the growing demand, independent living, chronic care management, remote access, and wellness and fitness solutions. Our 4th annual Future of Video, OTT, Pay TV, and digital media brings together senior leaders to share insights on consumer adoption, churn, and spending on services, including the role of the connected CE in the growth of video viewing. If you are looking for new ways to engage with our audiences, increase your brand awareness, and network with our industry leaders, I would love to share with you on how to partner with Parks Associates to help provide your brand more visibility.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We will now transition into our interactive panel discussion. We have a broad group of panelists, a number of different panelists, all of whom are actually providing smart solutions in the multifamily space. So it should be a really interesting discussion with some solid takeaways. So we'll kick it off with a round of introductions where each panelist will get an opportunity to tell you about their company and sort of how they fit into the space. And then, of course, we'll kick off our actual discussion and then leave some time towards the end for your questions. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and start these introductions. And we're going to start with Demetrius from SmartRent. Demetrius, go ahead.
Hello, Patrice. Thank you. My name is Demetrius Barnes, Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of SmartRent. We were once a small little startup here in Scottsdale back in 2017. Today, we service just over 200,000 units across the country, about 40 states. The road isn't ending for us, and we're really just getting started. So really happy to be here and work with our other panelists.
Move to Chad. And Chad is the VP of Sales at SmartCon Solutions. Go ahead, Chad.
All right. So my name is Chad Burrow. I am with SmartCon Solutions. We are a full-service end-to-end systems integrator working in a variety of vertical markets. Specifically, MDU is certainly the topic of the day. We're vendor agnostic, so a lot of the discussion that we've been having today are centered around a lot of the devices that have been discussed today, the software platforms that have been discussed, and we're kind of the glue that brings all of those things together for the customer from a design perspective, from a deployment perspective, and for a support perspective during the entire life cycle of the implementation.
All right, thank you, Chad.
You're welcome.
And we'll move to Frank, who's the Chief Technology Officer at Entouch. Frank?
Hi, Patrice. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate having the opportunity to be here with the other panelists. I'll tell you a little bit about Entouch. We're a comprehensive solution suite platform that addresses the operational needs of multi-dwelling and multi-site property owners. By identifying operational issues, you can significantly reduce your operating costs, maintain a high level of customer and tenant comfort. We've got both a cloud and product ecosystem that form the foundation of our decision support platform. It's a turnkey solution, which puts security first. And so all of our products are secure by design and mitigating the concerns of multi-vendor solutions and supply chain security risks. We use a variety of different technologies that differentiate us from other vendors out there, and specifically an innovative rules-based alert notification system that makes sure that only actionable issues are brought to the attention of an operations team. And then there are triggers for automated actions that are based off of those alerts. So quite a bit of capability within the platform that I think will be of an advantage to property managers and give them flexibility as to how to respond to tenant needs and their own operational needs. In addition, energy savings are pretty fairly easy to achieve once a property or building is first optimized. But beyond that, I think the trick is how do you find continued energy savings? And usually that's done through identifying anomalies and extracting some meaningful insight from data that's been collected. So, at the bottom of what we do for companies and property managers, we try to create a path to a healthier planet by delivering sustainability solutions that help them reduce energy usage, drive their profitability, simplify their facility management, and then we believe we can do that by improving your profits one building at a time.
All right, thank you, Frank. And now we'll move to Sean, who is the VP of Smart Home Solutions at GE Appliances. Go ahead, Sean.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, Sean Stover at GE Appliances. So hopefully you know who we are. We obviously provide appliances to not only the retail space, but also the new construction, single-family, multifamily, hospitality space as well. So how do we fit into the smart energy? We actually got into the energy game back when the smart grids were super popular in around 2006. We've evolved ourselves from that point into products that work on a smart platform. And then we've even taken ourselves a little bit further and driven that smart all the way across our entire business, which generated Smart HQ solutions, where we've been able to offer and now offer to our customers and our owners the solution that unifies their product and their connection across the entire span of our business from end to end. From the point at which it comes out of our factories and is distributed to facilities, and that track and trace, being able to see where things are, to Smart HQ management, which is a fleet management system for all of the appliances inside of a building. So not only can you just control one, but you can look at every floor and every piece of the building that you have to be able to look at your appliances, understand asset management, understand where things are they working properly, et cetera. Down to the home for our end consumers, and then Smart HQ Service, which really allows us to create that smart connection, diagnose things over the air, provide over the air updates and corrections to our products, and if necessary, we can get right down into the firmware of the product and service it and correct it for you right there at the job site. So a really nice end-to-end solution that leverages all the pieces across our business.
All right, thank you, Sean. And now we'll have Say, and Say is the CEO and founder of IOTAS. Go ahead, Say.
Hi, yes, thank you for that intro. So I am the CEO and founder of IOTAS. IOTAS stands for IoT as a Service. And fundamentally, I think one of the things that I love about Parks Associates summits is that they always have a lot of stats. And I've always found that useful. IOTAS fundamentally is an IoT company that is working with MDUs and across the board with telcos and ISPs as well. So the I in IoT is very important, the internet part of it. And as mentioned in Sean's conversation with Elizabeth earlier, the managed connectivity part is one of the biggest challenges that we see across the board. So why we took on investments and backed by telcos and ISPs is mainly to make sure that we solve for that problem and bring a comprehensive solution. And as we grow and expand, we're also looking at energy as a service as well. And so working with several partners who are bringing that to bear. And if you look at the potential savings, this was a study that was done by ComEd, you're looking at potentially 6.74 kilowatt per square foot. And this is for an IoT specific apartment where we do put in a little bit more devices than maybe the average solution provider out there. And that equates to about, if you look at 18 million apartments in the market, about 119 gigawatt per year, which is 7.3 billion in potential savings, or enough to power New York City for 1 year. So Because of some of our partnerships and channel partners, we are expanding rapidly across the US as well as Canada, and also overseas to countries like Switzerland and UK.
Great, thank you very much, Say. All right, let's go ahead and kick off this discussion. And I would like to, the first question I want to direct to the panel, I also want to direct to the audience. So for the audience, you can find this question in your discussions control panel, and you'll find the poll tab there, and you'll find the polling question. So the first question is, and as I said, I'm directing this to both the audience and the panel, it's which is the most important value proposition of smart technology for property managers and owners? So of course, we're looking at access management and security solutions. We're looking at energy management solutions, property differentiation / increasing rental revenues, and then increasing tenant retention. So for the panelists, you can speak on those value propositions that I just mentioned before, or if you're thinking there's some other value proposition that's really driving the value for MDUs of these products, then you can go ahead and speak on that. So I want to get a sense of how these value propositions stack up as well, and what do you think is most important? So I would say anyone can go ahead and kick that off. We can start with Demetrius.
Property manager, I struggle between A and B, access management and energy management. With time on site, what my gut tells me it's access management, simply because managing keys and access and getting folks in and out of their homes and around the community has always been a challenge. And with smart access, you really do allow people to take more of a self-service approach. But on the flip side, when I think of energy management, I couldn't tell you how many times, and I'm sure folks that are watching, were paying utility bills that they had no business paying for because of a vacant apartment where the carpenter forgot to turn off the AC in the middle of the summer or something like that. So, I think it's tough, but I'm gonna put my hat in for access management and security solutions.
Got it. Any other thoughts, Frank? Do you have different thoughts on that?
Yeah, my perspective is a little different. I would say that property differentiation would be at the top of my list, and I think it's primarily because the prospective tenant expectation is for the convenience, right? And part of the challenge of convenience is that if you have a variety of different types of products within an MDU or apartment building, you have to think of them being an integrated solution. It all has to work together, right? It has to work seamlessly together. So to me, that's important. And I think a close second would be the energy management solution. It's becoming increasingly important to find ways to reduce operating costs. And so energy reduction, is obviously one of the most important ones. So I think that particular order stands out for me.
Got it.
Sure, Patrice, I could jump in a little bit on that as well. I guess for a differing perspective on this as well is that for us, it's energy management, but it works in close concert with access management. A lot of the customers that we work with on a daily basis are portfolio managers or their real estate investment trusts. And one of their largest motivators is reducing energy spend, especially in today's day and age with tight capital markets and capital budgets are compressed and they're keeping a very close eye on where they're investing their money. Anywhere they can reduce operating expense and create efficiencies from a management perspective or an operation perspective, they're very, very motivated by that. But oftentimes the solutions that we're implementing are in close concert with, the door lock, because that door lock serves as an integration point that may trigger certain automation features like lighting control or adding an additional layer of occupancy detection that triggers certain events based on occupancy.
Interesting. It's interesting that the platform providers are thinking energy management and access solutions. Because I don't know if any of you got to see the presentation I made earlier where we were serving the builders or property developers for multifamily properties, and they're saying, these property managers really want to see that increased rental revenue. They want to be able to charge residents more, by having these solutions. So we actually will be surveying the property managers in a month or so to kind of get their sense and really have a good sense of what everybody's perspective is on what's the real, what's going to drive that real value, in the use from having these smart products integrated in their system. Somebody, was it Frank that was trying to say something?
Actually,
go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, actually, we did the same kind of survey as well. We found out that actually at the highest priority, increased rent was actually the biggest, not, how do I put it, concern, but it may not actually be the biggest motivator for them to actually spend the dollars to make that, make the purchase or work with a certain service provider. So we found out that when in our survey, yes, we came up with the same thing, which is rental premiums, but it really depended on the type of building they were, whether it was new construction, whether it was retrofit, whether it was garden style versus high rise. That made a huge difference. If you're a high rise, access is one of the reasons why you'll go with the service provider. If it's a garden style, it may be actually retention because they already have 90% occupancy or more, and they want to really focus on retention and user engagement. And so we found different reasons why different types of buildings would go after certain solutions, if you will. And I think that's one of the key things is really understanding how the market and who you're serving and whether it's new or retrofit and what type of buildings and demographics they have in there. So.
Thanks for reconciling that for us. So increasing the rental revenues is the primary concern overall, but when it relates to smart solutions, it might be different. All right, so good. I've got the panel's perspective, the builder's perspective. Now let's see what the audience was thinking. Can you put the poll up so I can see if it was similar at all? All right, so the audience think that amenities that drive tenant acquisition and retention is the one that drives the highest value. So that's interesting there again. They had that additional option there, and most people went with that. So driving tenant acquisition and retention, but let us look at what they thought about energy and access. We have 15% thinking energy efficiency that creates savings is important, then 15% that thinks access control creates the greatest savings. So it's really different across the board. Everyone has a different opinion on this. And I know from just interviews and just talking to property managers myself, I know that, tenant retention is very important. To Sade's point, it's also one of those top concerns along with driving those high revenues or high rental fees. So very, very interesting and very different perspectives across the board, and I like it. All right, so I did ask this question earlier too when talking to the Visionary Insight speaker from Latch. Just wanting to get a sense when you're going, and all of you are providing a platform or some kind of smart solution to MDUs, when you're talking to these property managers, you all are going in with case studies and of course different benefits that you're proposing. And of course you're quoting numerical values too about the type of savings that it can drive or type of rental fees that they can charge by adding these solutions to their properties. So when do you get their attention? At what point do you get their attention for energy savings, for example? Is it at the 10% savings mark, 15%? And same for access. What is that business case or a dollar amount then that really gets a property manager's attention?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in and really just pick on what you said in the latter part there, Patrice. We actually just announced our partnership with Elevation Home Energy Solutions. We did a pilot here in the Southwest, and for the 1,000 or so communities that partook in that pilot, they saw over a 3-month period 15% savings in utilities, which is phenomenal, right? And in other sides of that spectrum, when I think about access, we're immediately seeing operational efficiencies that are bringing NOI savings of about 10 to 15%. And then holistically, when you throw in an entire solution that's working together, what we're seeing from our customers, going back to that poll question of, hey, what are you looking for? And ultimately, it's that retention, but to drive the rent up. they're getting their ROI from a package in just under 3 years. So you put that all together, right? And people are getting that return, well before 3 years is even there.
Interesting. Any other thoughts on that? When you get the attention of a property manager, what dollar amount is going to make that investment worth it?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot, Patrice, on the type of property that you're working with. For example, I mean, MDU can be spread across student housing, senior living, upscale, high rise, all the way to public housing or subsidized housing. And depending on where that property class lies, if you're looking at something like student housing where they're undergoing a performance contract, where they're looking at everything from, central plant initiatives to dorm room level controls and HVAC automation, they may be looking at an ROI in somewhere targeting it in the 5 to 7 year range, and an energy reduction based on like HVAC runtime reduction of 25 to 30%, somewhere in that neighborhood. Whereas on the public housing side or workforce development housing, things of that nature, they're running on a very aggressive energy management motivator to where they want to see, runtime reduction maybe in the 30% range or higher. So, but when you're dealing with more amenity-driven class of property like upscale high-rise, you're probably looking at that 15% range, somewhere in that neighborhood. So it really varies across the board depending on the property type and what their motivators are.
Got it. All right. So we talked a little bit about, the property manager benefits, and of course your solutions are of course targeting these property managers as well. But of course what residents like will factor in here for what the property managers are going to go for. I mean, that's their end customer. So in terms of resident benefits, I mean, we know they're different from the property manager benefits ultimately. Can you speak to what the primary resident benefits are? And say, I'm going to ask you to kick that one off.
Yeah, so I think Dhruva talked about this a little bit earlier, but what we're finding fundamentally is that Gen Z, the new, I guess, demographic that's arriving on the market and rental communities, they really care about 4 things, right? Which is technology. So smart home is one of the biggest drivers. Connectivity is a big driver. And then community. So community in the sense of shared values. So making sure that they have a shared value with their community, affordability, and sustainability. But really sustainability is a comprehensive viewpoint, whereas energy management is one component of this, but it's also how the MDUs supporting sustainability with different aspects of their building, from materials to any sort of carbon offsets, and focusing on just an overarching comprehensive solution. So some of our owners, like Sherman Associates, are even putting up solar farms and doing an energy deal with the local utilities. And so we're watching this really fascinating thing happen where some of our MDU owners are looking at energy and energy as a service as part of the offering for their community. And I think some of the real resident values is critical to understand of, we're not here to connect things, we're here to connect people. And what we really care about is how much engagement we get with our platform. So on average, we're seeing about 63% resident engagement with our platform. And that is mainly because of some of the things that we're trying to do on our resident app, as well as experience, that ties to those kind of 4 core values of technology, community, affordability, and sustainability. And I think this is where it gets really critical for any sort of energy partners or smart home providers to really deliver on what those value systems are. And this is, I think, that whole authenticity that companies are trying to offer residents and their values.
Got it. Frank, you had some thoughts on this as well?
Yes, actually, I just love the way that Say presented all of that. It's very valuable information. I think the perspective is spot on. I think the only thing I would add is that there may be an expectation also from that particular audience, right, to have a more seamless integration into the property manager's response to their needs. So let's say it's more of maintenance level integration. So when you have the smart home, it's not only just about all the technology that you have within there, but the technology that makes your life easier. So, let's say it's technology that can determine that a bulb went out or that there's a leak in the bathroom or something, anything that can happen behind the scenes that the tenant doesn't have to worry about. It happens automagically behind the scenes. And, simple things like an AC filter replacement, being able to have the system, the platform identify that it's time for that instead of saying, well, it's based on a certain number of runtime hours or calendar weeks. And so I think they look forward to making their life easier for issues related to maintenance. So that's all I would add.
Yeah, and I would just echo those pieces as well. When you talk about the service and the maintenance, it's that experience, right? I think a lot of the people nowadays, they expect to be connected. They expect to have that level of an experience. And when something does go wrong, if you can do it without ever having to disturb them, so not even having to access the apartment, can you do it over the air with some of the smart technologies that's available? I think that it takes that experience even a step further, and makes it overall enjoyable for them, and it drives the efficiencies of the MDU and the property manager, right? If I don't ever have to go into that apartment, if I can do things automatically, if there's a move in and move out, triggers that allow all these things to happen, all at once. So I'm not running refrigerators and things like that when I don't have to. I think there's all just benefits to the overall platforms.
All right. So we've talked a lot about the benefits here, and we're seeing that both the property managers and the tenants, tend to benefit from these solutions in a number of ways. So then it begs the question, why don't all properties have smart solutions? And I guess you guys might be asking the same question, but I mean, it seems like more properties should have implemented smart home technology by now. But when we do our research, it's definitely lower than would be expected. So why haven't more properties implemented these solutions? What are the primary barriers then impacting adoption?
Sure, go ahead.
Or Chad, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a couple things. I've often said internally and externally that our number one competitor is status quo. There is a fear of adoption that's existed with every evolution of technology that's come across for the last 30 years that I've been in technology. And as technology evolves, so do various degrees of fears that come along with it. And also one of the hurdles as well is the relationship between the enterprise and the tenant. The tenant has a one-to-one relationship with the technology, and they don't want to have to struggle with that technology. The enterprise, the property manager wants to see and aggregate the data and make actionable decisions based on what they're seeing, automate processes as much as they can, make their workforce as efficient as possible to maintain the property, to maintain tenant retention and things of that nature, but also deliver the amenities that that Gen Z is going to be looking for and expecting in their purchase of a condo or their rental of an apartment. So it's kind of a struggle between the tenant not wanting the property manager to have access to too much information. So there's a security and privacy thing that comes into play as well. So there's a lot of things in this soup of adoption challenges that come into play, and it's really incumbent on us as systems integrator and platform providers to solve those problems that exist throughout the entire ecosystem of the MDU marketplace.
Yeah, and if I
okay, go ahead, say.
If I could chime in, I also think it really depends on new construction versus retrofit, right? I think the new construction market is really there. And really, but it's a smaller subset, right? It's only 300, 400,000 units year over year. And so, Elizabeth spoke to this a little bit earlier as with Sean from Point Central. There's a couple of things that's going on in the retrofit market, which is that with the retrofit market, they're worried about supply chain, where they're worried about lumber and circuit breakers and such right now, right? So they're just trying to get some of those things. And I'm sorry, that's new construction. And so some of those new constructions are still concerned with those kind of challenges right now. But with retrofit, I think it is a capital cost, right? That is challenging. And so one of the things that we saw, while we saw tremendous growth during COVID, early on in COVID, there was in retrofit market, there was a need for them to understand what was going to happen and to hold on to as much cash as possible. So we actually made a program where we eliminated the cost of retrofit for connectivity as well as IoT. And that allowed them to get to faster adoption. But I'll say this, with new construction, I mean, I'm going to quote something that you guys published at Parks, which is managed connectivity is growing year over year. And what in 2018 was about 5%. And then by 2021, we're looking at 80%. So correspondingly, with managed connectivity, that allows for IoT to be easily added on, right? So we're going to see a huge growth in new construction. I think retrofit is just going to follow shortly on, but it's also a much bigger market.
Got it.
Yeah, I'd love to chime in as well. And I'd say just to echo those words, but I would, I have a soft and a sweet spot for retrofits and the existing assets that are out there. Year over year we've grown 300%, and that's predominantly been tackling the retrofit market. And to what we've all been saying, the different segments are going to have their different cares and whatnot. But retrofits, they want to keep residents happy, and they want to compete with these 400,000 new development that's happening year over year. So when you put that together, I'd argue if you look at NMHC reports, all of the top 25 owner operators out there are doing some sort of rollout. When I look at this year for us, we're doing another 200,000 units of retrofit. So, I'd be hard pressed to say, 3 years ago, it was a lot more education. Now it's pure demand. And what we're seeing, which I believe others, Sean, Say, various others, the demand is there. As Chad mentioned earlier, folks were trying to monkey see, monkey do, waiting to catch up. That time has happened. And so now it's about staying pragmatically ahead of what the new builders are doing. And so I believe that retrofit is, to Say's point, they were holding some cash last year, and now that we're in 21, they're ready to unload. So I'd say it's growing extremely fast.
Yeah, and to add one more point to that, I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier about rent premiums, retrofit actually has the highest growth for rent premiums because they're not at top of market rent like new construction is usually, right? So they are seeing about 10 to 11% rent growth with smart home properties. So they're raking it in when they do that and do the actual retrofits. And I'm sure Demetrios, you're finding that as well.
Got it. So I mean, you mentioned that one of the problems is that they were trying to wait and see, and now everybody is watching and seeing what's happening in the new buildings, and they're of course doing it as well, and they're trying to catch up to all of that. So that solves the wait and see problem. But you also mentioned in the beginning that there was an education problem, Demetrius. You mentioned that, and I think Chad, you also mentioned that there's still some fear out there. So for Demetrius, then I guess the question would be: so how did you overcome that education problem? Did you just kind of provide a lot of materials and case studies and things like that? And also for Frank too, I'd like to follow up with you just to find out how do you overcome that problem of the fear, just to get a sense of how we move forward. So Demetrius, go ahead.
Yeah, so the real answer is from 2017 to 2019. I don't think I slept at all, but truly, it's transparency, it's clarity, and I can't say that enough. As Chad, you mentioned earlier, privacy, that was a huge concern, and the more that platforms and service providers realize that you owe it to the users, which could be residents, could be managers. You have to be clear about what you're doing with this data. In some instances, owners, operators, they want to use this data to their advantage. In some cases, they don't want any of the data, right? Because it could be personal. So there's a level to how we solve, and I believe others are doing the same, and that's being transparent. And that was really on the back of kind of the standardizations that we're seeing with privacy laws across the country, across the globe. And once we were clear there, and we found champions and people that could say, I'll pick on one of our first clients, Aimco, traditionally garden style, retrofit style company. when they rolled out their entire portfolio in just about a year and a half, and they're showing the world that they're saving money and making money just on the operational benefits alone, I think, again, that's really what they were able to champion what they were able to do and really just set the tone. And shortly thereafter, again, I speak for hopefully all of our panelists, across the country and globe, you've seen people just say, how do I adopt? How do I bring this in? And so, again, I think that barrier is gone. And I think, again, that's really just through the commitment of transparency with how it all works and how does it benefit you.
Got it.
Yeah, I think I would add that on the security side, that's really top of mind. It's crucial that any organization, before they introduce any technology into their infrastructure, really understands what the devices are doing, the level to which they have to commit resources to manage it and make sure that it's properly configured and operating properly. Maintaining software updates, it's one of the components of responsible organization having to do its due diligence, not only pre-installation but post-installation, to make sure that the tenants are comfortable with the products within their space, and then that the property managers are also facilitated. The tool facilitates the management of those devices instead of, you just can't leave it alone, right? It's one of these things that just because you're not hearing anything doesn't mean that there's not anything going on. So you really have to pay attention to the devices once they've already been installed.
Got it. So what about networking and sort of that Wi-Fi? Because I know that connectivity forms sort of the backbone of making any of your solutions work. But I interestingly never heard anyone mention that. So is it that it's all good where networking is concerned when you go into these establishments? Sean, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know. I was waiting for my chance. Networking I would say is one of them for us. Particularly in retrofits, you may not be there. It's a little harder to get it. Once it's there, it's great. But it is that capital investment that is needed to be there. And I would echo what Say said on the new construction side. We're seeing that kind of pullback of, they're starting to question where it is they want to spend their money, which was an interesting angle for them to take. But I think if you can show them what that value is, like Demetrius said, show them that you have these people that are out there, you have these leaders that are out there that have taken the step, that have been a thought leader in the space and a mover in the space, that shows that savings. You can talk back a lot of those barriers that are there. But networking is a challenge. For us, we don't. Our products don't use a whole lot of bandwidth, but you do need a consistent connection. And when you don't have that, that's when you start to create more headaches than you want. And that's definitely something that none of us want to do. So connectivity problems have always been I think have been a challenge. Hopefully we'll get better with new technologies that are coming, but definitely are something that was a barrier for us to have to overcome.
Yep. Yeah, I could add to that what Sean said is 7 years ago when I started in this industry with IoT devices, bandwidth was a huge concern. And in one of our parallel markets, which is hospitality, it was a huge concern, because if your guest Wi-Fi was bad, you were not going to be a very successful property. Now these systems have become so robust, and from the ISP side, right? A residential download and upload speed now is close to a gig in speed. So with as demanding as our devices, or the little demand that we have on the networks now are robust enough to where that's become far less of an impediment than it was, say, even 5 years ago.
Got it. Okay, so is it any different when you're approaching the higher end properties versus the lower income properties? Do you find that you have these networking challenges, or any of the challenges that you've addressed so far? Is it any different when you're looking at the different types of properties?
You're talking about digital divide right there. No, we tried to actually go after it where it's affordable. Again, kind of going back to the value system, that it's affordable for the connectivity side. And in some ways, that connectivity is helping to offset the cost of IoT devices, right? So again, we're putting in capital to retrofit these buildings with both connectivity and IoT. And connectivity is not just in the resident units, but it's actually across all the common areas and all the access entry, like all those access entry need to be connected for it to work properly, and across the different types of campuses, whether it's garden style, high rise. And it has to be. I mean, this is something I think all of us as providers really have to think through the business model, how to make that digital divide not greater, but less, right? And so on the affordability side, again, being able to provide capital to be able to offset the cost of the capital that needs to be invested for building owners if they don't have the capital to do the proper connectivity solution, which would provide the security. So for us, we typically have a separate IoT only connectivity solution, and then a resident only connectivity solution, so that they don't cross over. So to kind of provide that security level. But I think that's also something that has to be considered going forward, is that we are not here to create an additional, gap in the digital divide.
So you basically have to broaden your portfolio a little bit when you're going to the lower income properties and offer them that, financing and networking backbone along with it.
Yeah, it's a potential different business model and opportunity, right? So
yeah. Got it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about, we're talking about benefits, we're talking about the business case, but we haven't really gotten down into what the implementation looks like and what exactly it's doing then, for the property managers. So can we talk about what these smart home solutions look like? We sort of touched on the networking piece as well, that you need a good solid networking infrastructure. Maybe Wi-Fi is the preferred version, I don't know. But beyond the networking, then can we talk about what the smart home solutions look like in terms of the actual hardware that you're implementing, the actual services that are built on top of these hardware, just to get everybody kind of oriented into or about how the solutions work. Do you want to go ahead, Sean or Chad?
Sure. Go ahead, Sean. I'll let you go first.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, again, from our standpoint, I'm a slightly different than everybody else in the panel. Where I'm providing the appliances and then a platform that they can run upon, and then we run in conjunction either by ourselves. We have our own portal that allows property managers to manage their system if that's what they choose to do, or a hospitality suite or whatever it might be. But we also have a robust set of APIs that allow us to integrate into other existing systems that are out there. So we really kind of look at ourselves as we want to provide choice. We want to be able to integrate with systems that are already in existence for our customers that are out there, while providing great products and a great experience for the tenants that live inside of those units that are present. And we want to be able to give that control where it's needed, whether it be at the resident or whether it be at the property manager, to be able to effectively manage that facility so that they can, again, drive the higher rents, control the overall cost and efficiencies, whether it be energy, whether it be access, et cetera, to drive the bottom line for them, ultimately giving them ROI and NOI that they're looking for.
Yeah. So I'm looking for some of those, very specific use cases, those very innovative and advanced things that your solutions are doing that's going to drive that ROI. So what is your actual solution doing?
So we do everything from, we can, let's take one that's not energy, but let's take a leak, right? So you get a leak detection, right? That can be devastating for a property, right? It could be multi-layers and multi-floors. We have systems that can pop that up directly for property managers so that they can see it right away and deal with it right away before it becomes 1401's problem and 1301's problem and 1201's problem, right? And that's one example. Other ones are check in, check out, right? Is the room occupied or not occupied? So in a hospitality suite, I don't want to be cooling that room and driving energy if I don't have to. So on checkout, it's just a natural trigger for us to be able to turn off that AC unit that's there. Water heaters is another great example. When you look at energy, we have systems with mixing valves that if you're tied to a demand response or a time of use pricing, right, we can drive energy into that water heater while energy is cheap, and then use a mixing valve to regulate the temperature of that water that's coming out of it to give you the overall impact of energy response. So,
got it. So Frank and Demetrius, I want to come to you on this as well, because I know you both have platforms out there that are doing very unique and innovative things. So if you want to talk about some of the access solutions or some of the energy management or anything that you're considering, that's important here. So Frank, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah. So I think I wanted to start off with, when we were talking about networking just a few minutes ago here, the challenges that can bring. One of the innovative things about our platform is that our ecosystem can communicate wirelessly among themselves. So there's really no need for the internet connection, although we have a device that has a cellular backhaul if needed, but we also can hop onto an existing network if it's there, but the devices communicate among themselves very readily. Now, I think, for an optimal apartment solution, it's got to be something that makes it easier for the property managers to centrally manage all of these devices, right? And have visibility across all of the devices throughout the units. Energy savings, really, those come down to identifying units that are poor performers, units that are not exhibiting the energy profiles that is expected for that type of device. So if you can see equipment that is starting to use more energy than its baseline measurements indicate, that's a real easy opportunity to go in there and find it early, instead of having a cumulative effect where you're paying for that excess energy unnecessarily. So the energy part of it is a very strong, powerful message when you identify the contributors to that. I think the other one that's significant is making sure that there is a verification process for when an equipment, let's say, is fixed or replaced. Now, does the energy footprint now reflect that piece of equipment has been fixed? So it's not just visibility of things that are going wrong, but also confirming that once they've been addressed properly.
Got it. Demetrius, do you have anything to add there?
I'll try and bring this all together in an example that hopefully just puts what we're all saying together. Last year, around this time, the entire country shut down. And so for the communities that were smart communities, what is a smart community? That is an IoT solution in-home that's smart access around the entire community. So back office, gyms, pools, gates, parking. Okay. And then for those ones that were lucky enough to have Wi-Fi, right? That's fine too. But you take one of those smart communities, and let's think about that experience the minute these states started shutting down or municipalities started shutting down. Our smart communities were able to immediately respond by turning off access to various areas that could hold a higher congregation of people. They were immediately able to offer self-guided tours. They were immediately able to mitigate some of their teams that were on site, in the sense of, an office that once had 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 people. At one point, they were working from home. So how are you able to conduct business? And so when a prospect's able to be told, hey, where to go park, right? Through that app experience, and then where that model is to go see a unit, and then do that application, and then move in, all without ever talking to someone, physically seeing them in hand, and only engaging, through some form of digital communication. That's really when I believe personally, and I think others will, where we saw the rest of the industry kind of wake up and say, hey, I have to add this level of infrastructure to my community. And so, I take what everyone is saying. Whether it's a massive disaster, let's talk about that leak. What happens when you actually do get that leak? Because your kids stuck Vaseline down a drain and now water's overflowing. That's a life experience. But what do you do? Now is traditionally the service person, they've got to go to their office. They've got to pop open a key track or handy track, take that key, walk back over to that unit just to go inside that unit. to realize that they caused damage to another unit. Then they got to go back to the office and go through that whole process. All the meanwhile, gallons of water are destroying that asset. And so very early on, we saw simple solutions as being able to detect and being able to offer access to service teams immediately was a game changer. But I fast forward back to what we saw a year ago, and I think even more so as I talk about newer solutions of ours, and I'll pick on parking. In some of our dense urban markets, parking is a struggle. As most of you know, in the new builder world, I believe the stat is it's 1.15 parking spaces to a unit. Well, how does that work when more people are working from home now more than ever? You don't have open parking, right? And so to be able to offer a solution to help control that, and as you said so beautifully earlier, bring people together. I think that's where we're on the forefront of. And so, I echo what everyone said, but those would be the real world examples of what a smart community does, how it works for you. And when your residents see that, that's what provides the stickiness.
Interesting points, and very interesting point too about how COVID-19 sort of made a lot of this relevant versus a nice to have. So very interesting point there.
Mm-hmm.
I do have one more question that I want you guys to address before I get into those questions from the audience, because they are queuing up. And I want to know, because we're talking about energy management, we're focused a little bit on energy management, and I want to know if there is an opportunity for the utilities here. So if the multifamily properties, you can deploy, smart thermostats and energy devices at scale. So, that could definitely, I can see it being of importance to utilities who want to, be able to manage the grid better. So is there an opportunity for utility partnerships here with MDUs that have embraced smart energy solutions? And anyone can take it away. Chad, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. And I think I could use New York University as a really good example here. They've got a real potpourri of staff, MDU buildings, student MDU buildings from varying degrees, and they participate in a demand response program. I think where the evolution of demand response is automating that process. That's a gap that exists today, but it's closing. But the utility participation, especially in areas where grid quality is a concern, New York being one of those areas with a lot of older infrastructure mixed with newer infrastructure, and obviously very high demand. Demand response is an area right now, and it's been brought up today a couple of times, where the utility participates. The utilities are also participating on the incentive, and we've heard about rebates. I think the Point Central discussion early on touched on rebates. Utilities are offering a lot of incentives out there. I think where utilities could participate more, they are very much on the single family side, and somewhat on the MDU side as far as individual tenant relationship. But they need to, and they're starting to engage more on an enterprise level as far as the incentives they're offering, the participation in data, sharing data between the various platforms that are out there from a software standpoint, to export that data to them or give them access and visibility to it in a secure and private way that allows them to, make decisions on their side as far as how they're allocating energy and where they're ramping up and ramping down.
Yeah, and I wanted to just add it because we've been looking and working with utilities on various angles around this. And I think one of the key fundamentals here is that the demand response program, it's a two-way street. I think some of the things that has to be recognized, going back to kind of use cases that you mentioned earlier, is that, when Texas experienced the power outages, when California and my, hometown, Portland, Oregon, also had all those outages due to fire and other snowstorms, et cetera. There's a huge incentive, if you think about the MDUs, where MDUs can reduce peaks and valleys. We can tell with smart properties when a unit is occupied versus empty, right? And so based on that, we could choose to not turn on certain units, reducing some of that peak when a power outage happens and power comes back on. There's a huge peak that happens, right? So it's not just a one-way street of information. It should be a two-way street of information where we can say, hey, with this building, with these units, we don't have to turn these on when your power comes back on the grid. So the fundamental challenges that we found is making sure that the APIs that we're working with the utilities is also a two-way street, right? And where we're not just getting a notification, it's like, oh, turn down your thermostat or turn up your thermostat, whatever it is, but it's a true collaboration that can really benefit the industry and the grid at large.
I'd love to add really quickly, say that was perfectly said. And the only thing I'd add to that is, unlike other things, whether it's locks, fires, so on and so forth, grids are typically, private. They operate on their own standards. Depending on the state or the municipality, they govern themselves. And so when we think about the convergence of the MDU space, beyond just the tenant rebates, again, I look at our partnership with Elevation Home Energy Solutions, and the whole premise is, how do we work together, whether that's SmartRent and IOTIS, Point Central coming together and bringing our MDU clients in the room so that we can work together to really help change how we look at energy management at a national level. And I believe that is, it's not going to be an overnight solution, but the more that our MDU owners out there understand how this all comes together, I think there's a lot of power when we're all aggregated as one and speaking as one.
All right, great. Thanks for that, Demetrius. And our very first question
Patrice,
here. Actually, yes.
If I may, I'd like to just add something, a final thought here real quick about demand response, because we've been doing this since 2014. And, we're based out of Texas. So we deal with a lot of challenging power issues during peak times in the summer. One of the things that we found that's really powerful, and we have automation in place, is for a customer to understand the difference between how much curtailment they're willing to take to sacrifice customer comfort, because it's a give and take, right? If you're participating in these programs and you get a signal to shed load, you've got to have a strategy of how you're going to do that and minimize your customer or your tenant comfort. So the solution that we came up with was by developing strategies that the customer, the property manager decides how much they want to go ahead and impact their tenant versus how much load they want to shed. So, it's something that they have to be well informed. There's a lot of opportunity. There's really significant opportunity when you've got a lot of units out there. You do incremental shedding, and you get some aggregated savings from that, which is not, you don't have to shed a lot like you do for a single C&I building, right?
Yeah, but you said they have to be well informed, which comes back to that transparency point that Demetrius mentioned earlier. So let me go to the first audience question. I do want to take at least a couple of these before we go. So the first one is, how are all of the smart platform providers able to scale to provide a nationwide cohesive service to end users? And let's go to Say, do you want to take that?
Sure. So one of the things that I think I mentioned is that we're backed by some really great telco ISP partners, and also rolling out with some really great ones like SBA Tower Communications, the largest global tower provider, who also is heavily invested in energy as a service, and others out there. And one of the things that I really like about those partnerships is that they have lots of trucks, they have lots of operations and feet on the ground. And so for us, we are actually leveraging that partnership to be able to operate with all of our systems and maintain our systems. That being said, if done right, we only get 3 calls for every 100 units installed on a monthly basis. So our system runs itself pretty well, right? And I think that's one of the things that I would say is, like, IoT as a solution is a low touch solution once installed properly. So,
all right, which let me ask one more question, and it's kind of connected. So how big, as you mentioned, having it be installed properly, how big a challenge is interoperability? And anyone can take this question. All right, you want to go ahead with it, Chad?
Yeah, absolutely. So that really is the core of our value proposition, is pulling from all the various manufacturers that are out there and ensuring interoperability. I think one of the things that we do that we take very seriously is that as we're engaging in a new partner or a new release from an existing manufacturer, is we do a lot of lab testing. We try to simulate a deployment before we actually go live with it. We have a great basket of customers that we can pull from that are open to being early adoption to doing mock-ups. So that real world testing is really look at it in two stages. Taking manufacturer data, actually deploying it in a lab environment in our back office, and then doing mock-up installs and seeing how it behaves in the real world. It really takes also a very cohesive group of manufacturer relationships that we work with that are very open to sharing and collaborating from an open standards perspective versus, you know, closed and proprietary standards. So interoperability is, everyone says their stuff plays nice in the sandbox, but until you actually go out into the real world and deploy it and see how it behaves, it really takes that systems integrator. And I'm not, you know, trying to say that as a plug here, but having that expert that understands the real world behaviors of these devices and how to deploy them, what the tricks of the trade are, so to speak, and instilling that confidence that you're going to be there to make any fixes, especially with cloud-based software. Those remote diagnostics and fixes, often like firmware patches, can be, you know, pushed over the network very easily. But interoperability is the key, because oftentimes we're working with not only the HVAC equipment like Sean's PTAX, but we're working with, you know, a Lutron lighting system or, you know, Legrand lighting and shades and drapes and all these things that have to be controlled in one cohesive platform. Yeah, it's probably the biggest challenge. And then owning that support factor after, instead of having the customer doing finger pointing at 5 different devices to figure out who's the problem child. You know, I think the gap is for the SmartCons of the world, the InTouches of the world to say, hey, we'll own that. We'll own that headache for you, Mr. Customer. We'll figure out who the problem child is and we'll fix it.
Got it. I agree.
Yeah, and I think one key thing to just to piggyback on Chad's comment here, the interoperability doesn't mean that they all speak the same language, right? It just means that they all can work together and orchestrate the way that they interact. So for the listeners out there, it doesn't mean they all have to have the exact same interface. They just have to have one way to put the glue together to get them all to bind and to communicate. Because there are some, you know, some very specific pieces of hardware that have some significant features that you don't want to lose by abstracting that out into one common interface, right? So, and I think this is where, you know, organizations like ours really try to understand how to properly do that, and it's not easy.
Nope.
Yeah, I would argue. I was actually going to say that is exactly why solutions like yours are important. But with that, I do have to close this panel, so that will have to be our last comment. I want to thank all of you for definitely helping us to understand this space a little bit more. I think we could definitely have talked for a lot longer on this topic, but we do have to close out. So thank you so much once again for your insights, and thank the audience as well for your participation and your questions. I do have some additional reminders before we hop on over to the networking session. So join us for the networking session, as I mentioned, which is talking about expanding the role of smart home products in MDUs. As a reminder, again, we do have a number of events in this Smart Home or Smart Energy Summit series. So after today, we do have 2 additional opportunities for you to participate in these discussions and learn a little bit more. So there's one on August 4, the next stages of EV evolution. And of course, there's one on October 27 as well, which is partnerships and tech advancements, shifting consumer behavior, energy efficiency, and demand response. So a lot going on there. Wanting to thank our sponsors once again. So we want to thank Bidgely, Grid4C, Austin Energy, Decibel, Flow, American Water Home Services, and Very. No, I did mention this earlier, but I do want to remind you that we do have some upcoming research in this space, so look out for that. We will be surveying property managers to get their perspectives on these smart home technologies. So we've gotten a lot of perspectives from builders and industry panelists and consumers, so now we'll be going to the property managers to get their perspectives. And if you have any questions on any of our research or any of our events, feel free to reach out to Jason Paris. His contact information is right here on your screen. So with that, thank you again for attending. Please join us over in the networking session. There should be some links provided in the chat tab in your discussions box there to the right of your screen. So look for those links and just click on over, and let's continue the conversation over in Zoom. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good evening.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Kent, VP of Research with Parks Associates, and I'm joined today by Genevieve Grenier, who's the VP Chief of Strategy and Business Performance with Flow Ad Energy. Hi, Genevieve. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Hi, so pleased to be there. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Why don't we start off today by hearing a little bit about Flow and what Flow offers and how you fit into the larger smart energy ecosystem.
Yeah, so we the company, it's funny actually, because we've been like such veterans in the space. We've been around for the last 10 years. And when we're looking at all the timeline and things and how things are accelerating in the last years, you know, we've come a long way. So we're covering all segments. So whether public, fleets, workplace, residential, our focus is uptime and reliability, with a strong element around energy management and making sure that whatever the network we're scaling, it's smart network and smart solution.
Wonderful. Well, so we are, of course, coming out of more than a year of really unique circumstances where consumers, commercial energy consumption and usage has changed quite a bit. Consumers' patterns of using vehicles and transportation generally has changed. Sitting in the EV and smart charging market, you're at a really unique position in the market to see a lot of those changes. Can you tell us a little bit about what this past year, 18 months has looked like from your perspective at Flow?
Yes, so what we've seen in charging patterns, especially on the public side or even like at residential front, because all our stations are connected. So we have like the real-time data all the time. We've seen like a slowdown in how people move and when they move. So, you know, out of a sudden, in LA, for example, we've seen peak around 1 and 2 p.m., like moving and shifting away from the initial peak that was like around 5 and 6. So probably people doing errands and stuff like that. So what we're seeing is like for sure a slowdown in the last almost a year now. But what we're also looking is the fundamental of that industry are not changing. And this is what we were the most scared back in March, where we were like, okay, you know, will EV go through that very big stress test? And we were looking at prices of oil at the same time. So, and then end of July, what we realized is all the models that were sold that were internal combustion engine were in decline, where EVs were growing more in Europe than in North America, but, you know, still going very strong in North America. So, you know, we now are looking with the latest announcement, a growing desire to accelerate that industry. And, you know, consumer response is there. And, you know, the demand, like it's like we're at a point where right now we need to make sure that we're fulfilling the demand that is coming.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think you used the term, you know, resilient, that the EV market is quite resilient, and maybe earlier in the year weren't sure how the market trends are going to develop, but given that that demand is there, we know that growing use and adoption of EVs means a lot more demand on the infrastructure and on the grid. One of the key ways that electric vehicles cross over into the smart home sector, which we are talking about a lot in the Smart Energy Summit community, is in charging, of course, whether it's a single family home and you're charging at the home or you're charging as part of an MDU complex. Can you tell us a little bit about how that part of the market is evolving and what we can expect over the next year or two?
Yeah, so, as we know, 80% of the charging happens at home. And I'll talk about single family home because when it comes to multi-unit residential, it's much more complex to deploy infrastructure. So what we're seeing right now in the trends is that the EV penetration is greater in areas where people actually have a private parking, and in downtown cities where there's dense urban areas and people can have to park on the curbside. This is where EV penetration is the lowest. But what we are looking at is in some pockets, and I live in a neighborhood where, fortunately or unfortunately for the utility, we have 10% penetration right now of all vehicles being electric. And prior to the pandemic, what was happening is everyone was going back from home and charging at the same time at 6 p.m. And it has like tremendous impact on the grid. So what we're looking at is how utilities and energy partner will respond also to that increase of demand. And we want to make sure that the grid can take it. And this is where aggregated solution like demand response will play a key role in how that infrastructure will roll out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we'll be talking about with many of the speakers throughout the Smart Energy Summit sessions from the utilities and energy providers perspective, use of demand response programs, the variety of connected devices in the home, EVs being one of them, and the charging infrastructure being one of them, and managing that load. And it is interesting to think about how long-term perhaps change in work and commuting patterns may impact that, especially if you have the time of charging spread out, if not as many people are doing the traditional commute, right? And more people are at home, and whether or not that changes trends. And so the ability to have that aggregated view and be able to shift your management of the load quickly and flexibly, right, to adapt to those patterns might be even more important.
Yeah, and I think we'll see also an variation of what mobility used to be. So we'll see new patterns emerging, and I think all the energy players right now, they're looking at, we're about like 2-3% of penetration of EVs right now, but if you push down the line and you're looking at, the next 5-10 years, they really need to plan accordingly, and they need to do it in a manner that they're not also stressing their grid at nighttime, where they can lower the transformers lifespan. So it's a very interesting kind of equilibrium. And right now there's a lot of pilots that we are participating in, and the widespread of those pilots are still not there, but we're seeing some project having more traction and where utilities want to be extremely proactive.
Well, Genevieve, thank you so much for your insights and telling us more about flow and what you're seeing in the market right now. We appreciate adding your voice to the many voices in the Smart Energy Summit community throughout this year and the many discussions that we have. So thanks very much for being here, for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Kent, Vice President of Research with Parks Associates. And I'm so pleased to be joined today by Debbie Kimberly, who's the VP of Customer Energy Solutions with Austin Energy. Hi, Debbie, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, Jennifer. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today and joining the Smart Energy Summit community. There's been so much change in consumers' lives, in patterns and behaviors and work and across the country the past year. What can you tell us about what Austin Energy is seeing and how these changes are affecting your business?
This past year has been a year like none other. And when we closed out 2020, I think all of us said we never want to repeat 2020 again. And 2021 has posed its own set of challenges. On the plus side, I would say one of the things that's notable for us at Austin Energy was this last year, we celebrated our 125th anniversary. So it was a remarkable year in which to see how our industry has changed, not just over a year, but over a century and a quarter. So it's been nothing short of remarkable. And you look at the way our population has changed in Austin, that too is remarkable. Notwithstanding a global pandemic, an economic collapse, and everything else in between, we've seen more and more customers move to Austin, both residential and commercial. And we see customer growth that is really sustaining us, though our energy consumption levels are very, very low. So that's good news for somebody like myself that's focused on customer energy solutions and sustainability. I would say one of the things that both the pandemic and as y'all know, I live here in Central Texas. I never expected that I would be sitting through not one, but two ice storms. And ERCOT mandated outages that affected and still are affecting a number of our customers. So what that points to me is overarching everything is the need for resilience. And that can be accomplished via all sorts of work that can be done on the grid, what consumers have and will increasingly, I think, want more of, and what we as utilities can help enable on our end. So for me, and it's always been this way, looking at it through the lens of the consumer, Jennifer, I've always talked about sort of the 4 C's, which is what consumers want, and that's convenience, control, choice, and cost, in particular low cost. But the central theme that all of our customers have said, no matter what research tool we use, is they want reliability or, viewed differently, resilience. That is the #1 priority for our customers, and I suspect for many of the people that follow you.
Absolutely. You know, I think the conversation about resilience and where different energy services and products play in delivering that resilience to the grid and ultimately to consumers and commercial end users. One thing we talk about a lot in thinking about the connected home generally is how you bring these products into the home and how you raise consumer awareness about products and how they feed back into the larger energy market. And can you tell us a little bit about where you're seeing there be opportunities, maybe shifting or changing opportunities in the connected home as it relates specifically to energy resilience for consumers?
Certainly. I would say one of the, I think a great example of a success story for us, Jennifer, is what we've continued to do with two-way communicating thermostats with our customers. And I think, as I shared at a couple of conferences ago, we modified the energy code. The city of Austin modified its energy code such that new single-family residences and certain multifamily residents, new construction, will automatically have as a standard in our energy code two-way communicating thermostats. And we've recently taken the approach of extending to our existing multifamily customers, a program wherein we overcome the split incentive. So I know that's utility speak, right? You've got, in the case of Austin, 60% of our residential customers rent. So that's higher than what you would see in most communities. And those customers are renting, but the property owner is the one that would otherwise be the one to install an energy-saving device, such as a smart thermostat, or one that enables us to move load. And what we've done is to put together programs wherein we go in and do not only smart thermostats, but solar screens, insulation, basically weatherization in these properties. And that helps us break down that split incentive. And our contractors that we work with have said that those smart thermostats, which have been, pretty much increasing since, I want to say, roughly 2013, if memory serves, are the granite countertops in the multifamily space. That's what those property owners really like. That's an amenity. And so we found that there is a really ripe, robust market for that type of amenity, for lack of a better word. And just the ability to have that and not necessarily be completely Wi-Fi enabled, but just the basics has been huge in helping us break down what has long been a barrier in getting multifamily property owners involved in our programs. Think of it this way. If in Austin you have a roughly 2% vacancy rate, that's a big hurdle to overcome. And we've done that, I think, very, very successfully. Now, a pandemic affected our ability to go in and do that for a while. So we did have to suspend our programs until it was safe for us to be able to go in and install those measures. And not just safe, it has to be safe for your customers, safe for your contractors, and safe for your employees.
Well, I know that we have greatly benefited from your experience and your insights, and I know that your customers and your employees have as well. So again, Debbie Kimberly with Austin Energy, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Jennifer.